electronic devices. If you wish to submit testimony, you may at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Just a reminder, no one may approach the dais at any point during this hearing. There may be no clapping. If you wish to voice your opinions, you may go like this. Thank you so much. And please, if you're testifying, please stay on topic. If not, we will have to remove you. Thank you so much. Chair Velázquez, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Marjorie Velázquez, and I'm the chair of the Committee on Consumer and Worker Protection. Welcome to our hearing on street vending in New York City. I'd like to recognize my fellow committee members, Councilmember Menin, Councilmember Abreu, Councilmember Sanchez, Councilmember Brewer. Street vendors have long contributed to the vibrancy of New York City's streets and to the city's food and retail landscape. Since the late 1800s, street vending has been an important entry-level entrepreneurial opportunity for new immigrants and has often been one of the only viable employment options available to them. For as long as there have been vendors hawking goods on city streets, there have been complaints and concerns about vendors, that they create sidewalk congestion, sanitation problems, and are unsightly and unfairly competing with brick and mortar businesses. Compounding these issues, street vending is regulated through a patchwork of state and local laws and rules that have created confusion for vendors, residents, businesses, and enforcement officers alike. In 2021, the council passed landmark legislation to increase opportunities to legally vend in New York City, as well as to bridge gaps in enforcement. Local Law 18 of 2021 established a new licensing and permitting scheme for mobile food vending and enabled the city to issue 445 new mobile vending permits each year for 10 years, increasing the number of permits available for the first time since 1983. Local Law 18 of 21 established the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement, creating a specialized unit with expertise in city's complex vending regulations as well as cultural competence to work with the diverse vending population to be the primary agency responsible for enforcement of vending regulations. In addition, Local Law 18 of 21 established the Street Vendor Advisory Board, a multi-stakeholder body tasked with evaluating the city's vending laws and making recommendations to the mayor and the city council to address duplicity, inefficiency, and burdensome regulations. The Street Vendor Advisory Board released a report in May 2022 with 16 recommendations which seek to balance the needs of street vendors, brick and mortar businesses, and consumers while expanding economic opportunity and safety. Over 2 years after the passage of Local Law 18, the Council has concerns about its implementation. As of September 27, 2023, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene has issued just 14 out of 445 potential new mobile vending permits for the first year's batch of applicants. And less than 2 years after the Office of Street Vending Enforcement was created in DCWP, Mayor Adams moved the agency to the Department of Sanitation. At today's hearing, we hope to hear about how the administration aims to improve its implementation of the licensure and enforcement schemes established by Local Law 18 of 21. The committee will also hear 6 pieces of legislation, 2 of which I sponsored, aimed at further streamlining vending requirements, cutting red tape, and increasing street safety while eliminating criminal penalties for vending violations. Many of these bills emerged directly from the recommendations of the Street Vendor Advisory Board. Intro 1060, sponsored by Councilmember Menin, would prohibit general vendors, mobile food vendors, and vendor-related activity from occupying bicycle lanes. Intro 1062, sponsored by myself, would allow mobile food vendors to display or store goods on top of their carts, and it would simplify the display requirements for general vendors. This bill would also remove bookkeeping requirements for general vendors and mobile food vendors. Intro 1188, also sponsored by myself, would eliminate the requirement that individual employees of mobile food vending carts or trucks each have a New York State Certificate of Sales Authority. Currently, the law requires vendors push carts to abut the curb, endangering the safety of vendors who must exit their carts onto the streets and potentially into oncoming traffic. Intro 1253, sponsored by Councilmember de la Rosa, would allow vendors to place their push carts 2 feet from the curb or as close as possible to an obstruction that is in or on the sidewalk. Intro 1264, sponsored by Councilmember Krishnan, would remove all misdemeanor criminal penalties for general vendors and mobile food vendors. Individuals who violate vending requirements would instead be subject to an offense and civil penalties. A pre-considered introduction, sponsored by Councilmembers Brewer and Farias, would prohibit general vending and mobile food vending on a bridge approach, restricting all vending on bridges to elevated pedestrian walkways that have at least a 16-foot clear pedestrian path, and prohibit vending within 20 feet of another vendor operating on a bridge. I look forward to hearing from the administration, street vendors, business and industry representatives, advocates, and other stakeholders about the state of vending in New York City, as well as these 6 bills. I now turn it over to Councilman Menin to make a statement.
Thank you so much, Chair, for holding today's oversight hearing on street vending in the city. Last year, the Street Advisory Vendor Board released a report with a series of recommendations on street vending. This board, made up of agency officials, street vendor advocates, chambers of commerce, and small business representatives, underwent a thorough review of the city's existing regulations for street vending. 16 recommendations were issued, ranging from community vending marketplaces to repealing bookkeeping requirements. That resulted in the street vending bill package before the committee today. My bill, Intro 1060, which has the support of the chair, prohibits vending or vendor-related activity in bicycle lanes. This is common sense and stemmed from the board's recommendation to clarify the prohibition of vending in bicycle lanes. I thank all of the Street Vendor Advisory Board members for their hard work in getting this report done that has led the City Council to again lead on legislation on this important topic. As the board's report notes, state and local laws can create a complex system for vending. The bills proposed before the committee today are a critical step in ensuring we have a comprehensive and robust system for street vending. I want to thank the bill drafter, Sarah Swain, and from my team, I want to thank my Chief of Staff, Jonathan Shutt, my Legislative Director, Brandon Jordan, and Legislative Aide, John Mendez, and I thank the Chair for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Menin. I'd like to recognize and allow Councilmember De La Rosa.
Thank you, Chair Velázquez, for holding today's hearing and for your leadership. I am glad to join the Committee on Consumer and Worker Protection today as we hear my bill, Intro 1253, a public siting bill that will designate the distances from the curb in which vendors are allowed to sell. New York City is renowned for its diverse and dynamic street life, with vendors contributing to the unique character and energy that defines our streets, specifically in my beloved Washington Heights. Many of these vendors, immigrants faced with employment challenges and economic realities of living in New York City, did what they had to do, to hustle, laboring through challenging weather conditions, taking a chance on themselves when the world wouldn't, just to be able to provide for their families. In Washington Heights, a neighborhood that I am proud to represent, street vending is a cultural staple of our community. It is the engine that keeps the diversity of the heart of the Heights. 181st Street is alive. As we currently face the threats of displacement, the vendors remain the last indicators that the soul of Uptown is still intact. Once the habichuela con dulce lady is gone, I fear our community will too. However, as we celebrate the contributions of street vendors, it is crucial to acknowledge the challenges that they face in their daily operations, constantly being targeted by police, barriers to permitting and licensing, limited public siting, and loud resentment from small businesses when street vendors are small businesses too. I am proud to be part of the solution with my colleagues today as we collaborate on a street vending package that addresses public siting, the repeal of criminal liability, vendor access to business licensing, and advocating for the creation of the Division of Street Vendor Assistance within NYC SBS. I urge all stakeholders, vendors, business owners, community members, and policymakers to actively engage in today's discussion. Today's hearing is an opportunity for us to delve into the pressing issues surrounding street vending, explore potential solutions, and advocate for legislative action that will shape the future of this critical aspect of our community. I also hope to hear from the administration on the stagnation of issuance of the 443 new licenses, and I thank you for being here. Let us embark on this journey of dialogue, understanding, and positive change for the street vending community in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to recognize Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Chair Velázquez, and thank you to the leadership of the City Council and our speaker for having this hearing on street vending. Thank you for making me, allowing me to make opening remarks as well. I just want to start by sharing the framing concern that street vending in New York City is broken. Vendors who are striving to earn an honest living through hard work, they deserve our support as policymakers, and they deserve a fair chance. But unfortunately, the system that we have today lacks effective regulation, as has been mentioned, despite gains that we made legislatively in the last terms. And instead of fairness, it involves officers confiscating goods from vendors who are just trying to provide for their families. Across our city, street vendors rise early and brave all weather to make ends meet. Neighborhood residents, however, small businesses and brick and mortar shops, they complain about concerns with our vendors. And as street vendors work to earn their living, they face unfair regulations that also have others complaining across the city of New York. We crush hard work of street vendors in the city without giving them an opportunity to have a license. And with that, I want to say that although Intro 1270 is not going to be heard today, I look forward to our leadership in the City Council working to hear and discuss solutions that are going to address the fundamental problems with street vending in the city of New York. So thank you to my colleagues in the City Council today. I'm proudly supporting the bills, 6 bills being heard today, and look forward to further discussion on street vending in the city of New York. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Councilmember Krishnan and allow him to give his statement.
Thank you so much, Chair Velázquez, and good afternoon to everyone here. Thank you to my colleagues, too, for today's critical hearing on a package of legislation that we really highlighted the importance of last week with the number of street vendors who joined us, the number of advocates on an issue of vital importance in our city. My colleagues, as Councilmember Sanchez just did, will speak to the different pieces of their legislation. The one I wanted to address in particular was my bill, Intro 1264. Now, in this city, we know that our street vendors are our smallest businesses. They sacrifice tremendously, many of them recent immigrants, to provide for their families, to pay their rent, to pay their child care expenses. They do so while feeding the families of our city, while feeding everyday New Yorkers, and they've done so during the pandemic, long before and long after. Yet our street vendors operate in a legal system that is, at best, confusing, with a lack of clear rules, regulations, organization, and at worst, punitive, resulting in criminal summonses, arrests, and the consequences that can come along with that, not just limited to the criminal system, but the immigration system, the housing system, and many other ways. A profession like street vending, our vendors, our smallest businesses, should not be treated in a way that criminalizes them, simply for providing for their families. I don't know a single New Yorker that believes that an immigrant mother selling churros in the street to pay her rent, to care for her child, should be arrested or go to jail. I don't know a single New Yorker that believes that the work that our street vendors do should be criminalized simply for supporting their families. Our poverty in this city should not be criminalized. However, the number of criminal summonses issued in 2019, the NYPD issued 377 criminal summonses for street vending. In 2023, the NYPD from January to September issued 127 criminal summonses. Decriminalizing street vending and ensuring that our street vendors are not subject to harsh punishment, arrest, conviction, and all the collateral consequences is not anything and should not be anything controversial. In fact, it was included as a unanimous recommendation from Mayor Eric Adams' Street Vendor Advisory Board, which included representatives from city agencies, street vendors, retail food stores, property owners, small businesses, and community organizations. This bill, in particular, working with the Street Vendor Project and many other street vendors in our city, recognizes the truth that I mentioned before, that It should be obvious to many and has been far too long in being implemented. We cannot criminalize poverty. We cannot criminalize the work of those who are sacrificing so much to support our city and New Yorkers every single day, especially when many are immigrants from our communities, immigrants who are essential workers in our city, who power our city forward every single day. They are the lifeblood of our city. And so I am proud today to join my colleagues, to join Chair Velázquez for this hearing on these critical bills around street vending in our city to provide an organized, regulated, and forcible system of vending and to ensure our street vendors are not criminalized for their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Now, Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and also to the speaker. And by the way, I love your hats. Those orange hats are beautiful. I am talking about a pre-considered intro. It doesn't have a number. That's how it works with pre-considered intro. The issue is, under current law, general vendors and mobile food vendors can vend freely on pedestrian walkways, on bridges, and bridge approaches. This pre-considered intro would prohibit vending on bridge approaches, restrict vending to pedestrian walkways that have at least a 16-foot clear pedestrian path, and prohibit vending within 20 feet of another vendor. It would take effect 30 days after it becomes law, if it does. And to say another way, like I said, the bill would prohibit vending on a bridge approach. Vending would only be allowed on elevated pedestrian walkways where there's at least a 16-foot of clear pedestrian path, and vendors must be at least 20 feet apart. You should know that this is an alternative to the Department of Transportation's proposal, which is an outright ban on vendors on bridges. And obviously, the most best example of where this has become an issue is Brooklyn Bridge. And the DOT had a hearing in November on the topic. This pre-considered intro significantly limits the number of vendors and ensures they operate where there's enough room to accommodate pedestrian traffic. I believe strongly that a full ban on vendors is not necessary. There are spots on bridges that are appropriate for vendors, and they are identifiable and they can be enforced. Particularly on Brooklyn Bridge, I don't know if it's more than 35,000 people walk on the bridge every weekend or more. And then a result of all of that, to the credit of DOT, they put in a bike lane. And I know that tour guides, they go up to see the views with visitors. We want a lot of visitors. And some of these tour guides realize that there are too many vendors, we know that, but there are ways, and the tour guides know this, to limit the vendors, but include them and to provide enforcement. This is a controversial issue like everything else in New York City, but I feel very strongly that there is an approach that includes vendors with a different way of keeping people apart on the areas of any bridge where there is room. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Brewer, and thank you, Chair Velázquez. Good morning and welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone who is joining us via Zoom that you will be on mute until you're called on to testify, at which point you'll be asked to accept to be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on public witnesses to testify after the conclusion of the administration's testimony and council member questions, so please listen carefully for your name to be called. Please note that council members will have 2 minutes for questions, and we will allow our second round of questioning if needed. We will now call on representatives from the administration to testify. We will be hearing from Carlos Ortiz, Assistant Commissioner for External Affairs at DCWP, Ryan Marola, Deputy Commissioner for External Affairs at DSNY, and Corinne Schiff, Deputy Commissioner of Environmental Health at DOHMH. At this time, I will administer the affirmation. Administration panelists, please raise your right hands. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you very much, Council, and thank you very much, Chair, for having us. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Marola. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for External Affairs at the Department of Sanitation. Thank you again for the opportunity to offer testimony on DSNY's role within the city's vending landscape. In March of this year, Mayor Adams announced the transition of the Office of Street Vending Enforcement from the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection to DSNY. Legal street vending is a vital part of New York City's economy, and compliance with vending rules is essential to keeping our city clean. In our capacity as the city's primary enforcement agency for street vending, we focus on the infractions that affect communities the most, things like obstructing sidewalks, curb cuts, building and subway entrances, leaving equipment and goods out overnight, and creating dirty conditions. This is a compliance-first approach rather than a license check-first approach. When infractions are observed, DSNY starts with warnings, which can take a few forms. We post warnings in neighborhoods 24 hours in advance of enforcement, or we directly engage with vendors to explain the infraction that we observed. Once we have warned, our enforcement actions run the gamut from issuing a violation for an infraction to confiscations of vending setups and product. Vending setups and product from general vendors are stored at our facility in East New York and are available for retrieval. Any food that DSNY takes is either donated to local food pantries or placed in DSNY composting bins and brought to an organics processing site. We have 30 local food pantries with whom we partner citywide and who have received more than 100,000 pounds of produce since April 1st. The food that we cannot donate is processed as organic material. DSNY's vending enforcement unit is comprised of 40 uniformed sanitation police officers that operate citywide daily. Since OSVE's transfer to DSNY on April 1st, DSNY has conducted more than 5,000 inspections and issued 1,056 violations. I would now like to turn to several pieces of the legislation that are under consideration today. Intro 1060 would prohibit vending or vending-related activity in bicycle lanes. We agree with this legislation. Intro 1253 would allow street vendors to vend on the sidewalk so long as vendors are within 2 feet from the curb or within 2 feet from an obstruction that blocks the curb. DSNY has concerns about the current formulation of the legislation. Today, the city's rules require that vending occur within 18 inches of the curb. The proposed expansion of the city's street vending sighting rules, not to 2 feet from the curb, but to 2 feet beyond an obstruction, presents complications for sidewalk usage. Sighting changes must be part of a larger conversation on how our public space is maintained, and we'd like to be a part of that. Intro 1264 would remove all criminal misdemeanor penalties from vending enforcement. DSNY does not engage in criminal summons issuance. We only issue civil violations for vending infractions. As Commissioner Tisch stated earlier this year, DSNY will only engage in civil summonsing when conducting vending enforcement. At this, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to testify and answer questions after my colleagues have offered testimony too. Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair Velázquez and members of the Committee on Consumer and Worker Protection. I'm Corinne Schiff, Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Health at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. On behalf of Commissioner Dr. Ashwin Vasan, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Health Department's oversight of mobile food vending and legislation before the committee. The department's mission is to protect and promote the health of all New Yorkers, including by promoting the safety of food sold from food carts and trucks. We do this by issuing permits to operate a food cart or truck, issuing licenses to the people who vend food, providing mandated training for vendors on food protection, and conducting food safety inspections. I want to start by providing a brief update on the department's implementation of Local Law 18, which expanded opportunities for street food vending. Local Law 18 established a new mobile food vending license called a supervisory license and a new kind of permit, a supervisory license permit. The mobile food vending license authorizes a person to vend, and a permit authorizes a food cart or truck to be used for vending. A food cart or truck with a supervisory license permit must be operated by a person with a supervisory license. The department is charged with issuing 445 applications for a supervisory license each year for 10 years as of July 2022. Supervisory license applications are issued to people on waiting lists in accordance with the local law's detailed criteria and prioritization. Vendors on the waiting list can track their progress on the department's new lookup tool available on our website. Once a person has a supervisory license, they are entitled to apply for a supervisory license permit for a food cart or truck at any time. There is no deadline to apply. We are now in year 2 of the program, and the department has issued all 890 supervisory license applications that were required to be released by June 30, 2024. Of those, as of early December, 342 vendors have applied for this license, and the department has approved all of the applications, issuing 342 supervisory licenses. 108 of the 342 new supervisory license holders have initiated the supervisory license permit process to obtain authorization for a food cart or truck. The department has issued 50 of these permits, and the other 58 supervisory license holders are completing their permitting submissions. The other 234 supervisory license holders may apply for the supervisory license permit at any time, and we are standing by waiting for their permit applications. Since Local Law 18 changed the license and permitting process, the department has been conducting outreach and education to help vendors understand the new requirements. Before Local Law 18, the cap and waiting lists were for permits, and there was a deadline for a vendor called off the permit waiting list to apply. The Council's new approach under Local Law 18 sets a cap and waiting lists for the new supervisory license rather than the permit, and there is a deadline for a vendor called off the supervisory license waiting list to apply. Once the vendor has their supervisory license, however, there is no deadline to apply for the supervisory license permit. Turning to Introduction 1188, which would eliminate the requirement that a person applying for a mobile food vending license have a New York State Certificate of Taxing Authority, limiting that requirement to mobile food vending permittees and supervisory licensees. This proposal will relieve burden on the industry without compromising food safety, and the department has no concerns with the bill, but would like to work with the council on the effective date. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to take your questions, and we'll turn over to my colleague.
Good afternoon, Chair Velázquez and members of the Committee on Consumer and Worker Protection. I am Carlos Ortiz, Assistant Commissioner of External Affairs at the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on issues related to street vending. The Department of Consumer and Worker Protection issues general vendor licenses to those who sell goods or services in a public place, such as the street or sidewalk. There are currently about 1,900 licensed general vendors. The number of licenses issued to non-veteran general vendors is capped at 853 licenses, and the waiting list for non-veteran applicants is currently closed. License applications for general vendors are available to veterans or the surviving spouses or domestic partners of a veteran. Introduction 1162 provides amendments to general vendor and mobile food vendor regulations governing display and bookkeeping requirements. The administration supports this legislation, which is also recommended by the Street Vendor Advisory Board, convened pursuant to Local Law 18 of 2021. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee on issues and legislation supporting some of our smallest small businesses, and I welcome any questions you may have for further discussion. Thank you.
How many new general vendor licenses did DCWP issue in fiscal year 2023?
I'm not sure I have the data for the fiscal year, but I know generally at the license renewal period, or every year, we're issuing about 150 or so licenses. I think there's a natural, this is a combination of non-veterans and folks who might call off the waiting list, and also veterans as well.
How long is the wait list for the general vendor license?
The wait list for general vending, for general vendors, currently has 11,000 folks on it.
As of September 27, 2023, 151 supervisory license applications were submitted to DOHMH, and DOHMH has issued 146 supervisory licenses. Can you provide updated numbers?
Yes, so those updated numbers are in the testimony. We have issued all of the applications for year 1 and 2, so that is 890 that were required to be issued, and then there was another 184 applications available due to applications that were not turned in, or permits that we call legacy permits, permits from the prior system that are no longer being used. So in total, we have issued 1,074 supervisory license applications in the first 2 years of the program, ahead of the June 30, 2024 deadline. And 342 people applied for those licenses. We approved all of those applications and have issued 342 supervisory licenses.
What do you think so many individuals who received the supervisory license applications had not submitted their applications to DOHMH?
So we've done a lot of outreach and education to make sure that vendors who are on the waiting list are aware of the opportunity to apply for the license and understand the new program that the council set up. We have not done a survey of those who do not apply to be able to understand why they've not submitted the applications. We did do a lot of outreach, including we have made phone calls. So we've done a lot of outreach, but we don't know.
So you mentioned phone calls. What kind of other outreach do you do?
So we've done mailings, we've done emails. We had a information session for the first cohort that were invited to apply. We held that with multiple languages were available for people attending that information session. We've posted the slides from that presentation in multiple languages on our website. So we really have tried to make sure that vendors who are on the waiting list who have the opportunity to apply for the supervisory license are aware of that opportunity.
Do you work with any groups, any advocacy groups for further outreach?
I'm sure you'll hear later from the Street Vendor Project. You know, we're in regular touch with them. You'd have to ask them about the outreach that they do, but they ask us for information and we provide that information to them.
Perfect. Do you follow up with vendors after they send a supervisory license application? I know you said you make phone calls, but is it before they submit, after submit, or a combination of the both?
I think that some of the phone calls I think are a combination of both, but I'd have to get back to you. I'm not sure that's right for the, let me get back to you about the exact timing of the phone calls. But there were also 2 rounds of rulemaking, and it is very important to us when we engage in rulemaking that stakeholders are aware of the opportunity to comment, and that also provides another chance for us to alert the stakeholder community that rules are coming. And then when rules are finalized, we repeat that outreach. So we really have taken multiple opportunities to conduct outreach to the community. As you noted in your testimony, Local Law 18 was landmark legislation making a big change. And so it was important to us and continues to be important to us to make sure that the vending community knows about the new system, which is quite different. So we've done a lot of outreach and education.
What's the average time frame from receipt of an application for a supervisory license to a supervisory license being issued to an applicant?
A typical time frame is about 3 weeks turnaround.
3 weeks. And if a vendor has questions about the process, where should they go? Online, calling you guys?
They can do either of those things. We have a lot of information on our website. The information is available in multiple languages. We typically translate our materials for this community into 16 languages. We also have a permits and licensing office, which engages in customer service regularly.
So I had an additional question when it came to the new lookup tool available on your website. If I don't have access to the internet, how can I access that information?
You can call our office and somebody can help you with that.
Perfect. Can you provide us with that number right now, if you have it?
I don't have the number, but we can get you that number.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Outreach. Okay, we're good with that. As of at what point will you issue additional supervisory license applications to make up for the people who received one but never submitted it?
So the local law requires us to issue 445 applications each fiscal year. As I noted, we have gone beyond that. We've met that deadline already for fiscal year 24 and have gone beyond that. What we're planning to do is issue available applications on a cadence every few months, really to spread out the workload. It is only the second year of the program, so exactly, whether we do the same thing in year 3, 4, 5, I don't know yet. We're going to see how it goes and what the uptake is that will help us dictate kind of the down the line workload.
Okay, and how many individuals have moved from the old permit to the supervisory license and permit scheme?
What the system that Local Law 18 sets out, as you know and you described in your testimony, is that in 2032, so 10 years after the launch of the program, all permits will be issued under the supervisory license system. I don't know that any permittee renewing their what we call a legacy permit, which I think this is what you're asking, whether any legacy permittee renewing has sought to convert to a supervisory license permit. We'll try to confirm that. I'm not aware of anyone.
Well, how do legacy permit holders learn about the new supervisory license?
So our outreach materials were sent to everybody with a mobile food vending license, so they would have gotten that. They don't need to convert to the supervisory license. They can continue on the system that they are in until 2032.
And is it in multiple languages that's sent to them as well?
Our education and outreach materials are typically in multiple languages.
So which agencies are conducting outreach to legacy permit holders to inform them of the new scheme? And how many individuals within that agency are doing this work?
So the health department is doing this work, and we have also been working closely with small business services. The information session that I mentioned that was specifically for the first cohort of those eligible for the supervisory license was a session we held with SBS, and we have been doing a series of trainings, outreach and education information sessions with SBS. I don't have the staffing numbers.
And you mentioned earlier a cadence of issuing the license, the supervisory license application. So when do you plan to make the next batch available?
I don't know. We can let your office know when we've settled on that date.
How many will be made available?
I don't know what the batching will be for how many we will issue and on what time frame.
And will the agency provide notice in the same fashion as before?
So there is a process that is dictated by rules that follow the requirements of the ad code for how we call people off of the waiting list, and that is the process.
During the approximately 2 years that the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement was in DCWP, the 14 vendor inspectors conducted more than 25,000 inspections, issued 2,800 vending-related summonses, and authorized confiscations of vendor goods 37 times. From the time that the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement was transferred to DSNY on April 1st, 2023 through September 14, 2023, the department's 40 employees devoted to vending enforcement conducted 1,568 inspections, issued 485 violations, and authorized confiscations in 423 instances. Can you detail how these approaches to street vendor enforcement have been different between the agencies?
Thank you for the question, Chair. When the Office of Street Vending Enforcement was moved over to sanitation, it was moved over with the understanding that we would have both a dedicated staff and one that could effectuate any type of violation or confiscation issuance on site. Previously, working with my colleagues at DCWP, we would help at times engage in confiscations, but it would be long planned as DCWP didn't have the staff to do that type of work immediately. The numbers you're seeing reflect the change in agency and, of course, then the change in type of position handling it.
I would only add to that we, when the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement was with our agency, we encountered a number of legal and operational hurdles to perform the work and to deliver, I think, results. And for that reason, I think the administration identified that sanitation be the best placed agency, and that's shown by their work.
What factor does DSNY take into account when authorizing confiscation? And how does that differ from considerations made by DCWP, and what accounts for the much higher rate of confiscations under you guys?
So when the Department of Sanitation engages in a confiscation, it's typically because we've encountered infractions, we've seen the infractions not go away over a time period, and then we are asking at that point in time vendor to show us whether or not they're properly permitted to be there, because our categories for confiscations are unlicensed, unpermitted, and abandoned setups. We have within the confiscation numbers a breakout of abandoned setups, which is quite significant and makes up about half of our confiscation numbers.
In terms of working through identifying confiscations, I don't think our process isn't very different from what DSNY has. It's simply that they have better legal and operational capacity to do such work.
What types of employees are involved in confiscation? For example, are NYPD officers on site? Are there representatives from city agencies available to speak with individuals in any of the designated citywide languages? And are written materials provided to someone whose property has been confiscated in all of the designated citywide languages?
On the, let me start last to first.
Yeah, that was a lot, sorry. So let me know if I need to repeat any of them.
I need to follow up with you, Chair, on just the languages that are on the summonses. I need to bring that back to you.
Okay.
On the personnel and the languages we have when interacting with vendors, it is only sanitation police officers that engage in this activity within the department. We have fluency of Spanish and Mandarin on our staff themselves. We have a language service to call for any translation needs. And when we post flyers, as I mentioned in the testimony, in neighborhoods prior to enforcement, the flyers are in 5 languages: English, Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, Urdu. Online, as part of what we inherited from our colleagues at DCWP and DOHMH when Office of Street Vending Enforcement moved over, we provide educational tips and guidance on how to be in compliance with street vending rules that are offered in 13 languages. Well, I don't have the group in front of me. If you were to go to nyc.gov/vending enforcement, you'd see those guides in each of the languages available as a link.
How does DSNY engage with unlicensed vendors prior to issuing a violation to allow such vendors to correct non-compliant activity?
This is part of the warning first and compliance first approach that we take. When we are first interacting with a vendor with whom we see non-compliance, we are telling them the infraction that we've seen. We're telling them they need to correct it, and we come back at a later date to see if it is corrected. Oftentimes, we do not see it corrected, but many times we do. And we have vendors on the streets who we have seen bring themselves into compliance that then become an inspection the next time and we move on. So that is the type of interaction that we do to have folks understand what needs to be fixed in order for them to be on the street.
And do you perform that in the various citywide languages?
Well, this is what I was saying before, Chair, and thank you for that question. We, when we interact with a vendor, we determine what language we need to speak with the vendor. So we do that. Typically speaking, we're encountering folks who need Spanish or some type of like Chinese, Cantonese, or Mandarin translation. We have that. We've used our language services to make sure that it actually comes to the person in their native language, because that has to come across.
And the other languages that are impacted in my district are Albanian, Arabic, and French.
This is what we have the translation service for.
Got it. Intro 1264 would repeal misdemeanor criminal penalties for general vendors and mobile food vendors. How would this bill impact your enforcement approach?
Practically, the bill wouldn't impact our enforcement approach because we are not issuing criminal summonses. We understand that this is a very significant issue and has been debated through the Street Vendor Advisory Board and other panels. The commissioner, when we took over Office of Street Vending Enforcement, made a commitment that civil summonses only would be issued by sanitation. We've stuck to that commitment, and that's how we'll be continuing.
And we hear you, and we respect that, but as you know, administrations change, and so do commissioners, and so the impact would be way beyond us. And so understanding that, not just now, but for the future, if we remove this, how would it impact your enforcement approach if you did have a different commissioner that did not believe in that?
Well, as we have a commissioner that we have now, I can only speak to that, Chair.
We
but
love her.
I'd also be very happy to say that we would love to work with Councilmember yourself and follow up on this afterwards. This is an important issue for us as well.
I appreciate that. In the past year, how many 311 complaints about street vendors have you received?
I am going to come back to you with that answer, and I apologize I do not have it at my fingertips today.
Okay. DCWP, how many in the past did you receive?
I think with respect to this past year, I'm sorry.
No worries, take your time, don't worry.
Just trying to find the right number here.
We'll be here for a while.
I think between January and April, we had received around 2,000 vending complaints.
How many?
2,000.
And how does the city respond to these complaints?
Sorry, I would just note that we received
I
those
know.
complaints when we were doing the enforcement.
It's the transition here, y'all. I'm
This is
gonna have
April
to
1st
tag
right
team.
here.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take the April 1st transition on that one. We use 311 to guide us as to what neighborhoods we need to put a presence in and see whether or not there are conditions that need to be corrected. 311 is one of the data sources, our primary tool for determining where we should be planning to go. But we absolutely take community input. We receive input from electeds, from community boards, from community groups. We take that into consideration as well.
Thank you. In May of 2022, the administration announced that it was taking actions to reform and modernize street vending regulations for New Yorkers in response to the Street Vendor Advisory Board's report. Can you tell us what exactly those actions were and provide an update on their rollout?
I think to provide I think Councilmember Menin provided a good summary that we had 16 recommendations from the Street Vendor Advisory Board. That was a very collaborative process that we engaged in with multiple stakeholders that were appointed from at the time Mayor de Blasio and at the time Mayor Corey Johnson, representatives from all walks of life in the terms of the streetscape, brick and mortar, as well as street vendors. The process that we had for that was allowing individuals to identify issues that matter to them that they're interested in, bringing that for discussion to the entire board, and then using a process of universal consensus to deliver the board's recommendations. And many of them are being brought up today in this hearing, which is excellent. I'm very happy to see that. And I think that we provided our positions earlier on those bills as well. I think there have been other programming that's been put in place as well around with SBS and DOT, but I think the city's commitment to supporting street vendors has been strong, and I also likewise see that from our fellow council members here.
It's been several weeks since the Corona Plaza vending market pilot began. Can you give us updates on how's it going?
Chair, that is actually something I would like to refer to colleagues who are not here and bring you an update on. This pilot is being supported, of course, by DOHMH, FDNY, DSNY, DCWP, but DOT and City Hall colleagues are the primary folks running it, and they'd be best to provide an update on that.
Would City Hall colleague Jake Capistran would like to respond to that one, or that question? Okay. So we'll skip those questions and we'll provide them. However, I'll put it on the record to have DOT respond to them going forward. Recently, the city proposed a rule to prohibit all street vending on bridges. Can you explain the reasoning behind this proposed rule?
Again, Chair, this is one that I would refer to my colleagues at City Hall and DOT. I can offer that, as you know, in the rulemaking process and the statement of basis of purpose, DSNY is supportive of the rule. Part of what we've seen in our enforcement on the Brooklyn Bridge is an incredible clogging of space, cleanliness issues, usability for pedestrians. We do understand and need to see some change there, and that is part of why we have supported DOT's rulemaking process, but we can't comment specifically on the rule or the language there.
So, and this actually came from an experience from one of my colleagues in their district, where we've heard that some business owners and or residents are charging, I am saying charging, street vendors to use the sidewalk outside of their buildings. What should a vendor do if someone tries to charge them for the use of the sidewalk? I know. Some people have gotten creative.
I think it'd be valuable for us to be able to be put in touch with that type of street vendor situation to understand more details outside of the hypothetical. I think there's a lot of that could be going on there that could be looked into.
As my colleague Sanchez just indicated, it also has been happening at parks as well. So, I mean, if we can collaborate and it's something where we can do outreach to all street vendors to make sure that they know their rights as well when they apply for their licensing. The additional questions I have is here, in your testimony you had said you post warnings in neighborhoods 24 hours ahead of enforcement. Is that posted in all citywide languages or just in English?
Those were, Chair, in the 5 languages that I had mentioned before, which are, forgive me, let me just pull them up so as not to do it wrong. English, Mandarin, Cantonese, Spanish, and Urdu.
In your testimony, you also stated that you've issued about 1,056 violations, but how much in total value, dollars?
I'll have to come back to you with that.
Okay. Can you give me an example of what happens to a vendor that does receive enforcement? Just guide me through it. You're saying you come to the community, issue a warning, you find someone, to your statement, that is unlicensed, unpermitted, and also unavailable. What happens next?
What we first find, if I may, Chair, is a compliance issue. Whether there's multiple tables, things bolted to the sidewalk. We see that there are dirty conditions around a vending setup. We look for that. We talk to the vendor first. We explain what the problem is. We give vendors a chance to get into compliance too in those circumstances. We have many instances in which our sanitation police will see within 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, did the vendor take the instruction to come into compliance? But that comes after we have had a warning exchange first, whether it be posting in the neighborhood where the postings say, infractions have been observed, you need to be in compliance with all vending rules, or direct engagement like I discussed too. We have that. When a vendor cannot come into compliance, then our issue is determining what violation are we looking at and what summons to issue at that point. When we come to the point where we see the occurrence is unpermitted or unlicensed, yes, at that point, after those steps and those interactions that I described, you will have a confiscation. And at that point, we give out a summons if the person's there. If the person's left their setup and it's abandoned, we do take it, but it is all retrievable. Person just has to come down to 59 Maiden Lane to ask for property. As long as they can describe it, we can do this then.
How much do you charge them to get their property out?
The storage fee, if it's with us for more than 48 hours afterwards, I think is something around, I'm going to get you the exact number after, I apologize, $16 a day, but I need to check on that. So let me come back to you with
Do you think that cost is too high for folks, especially if a table is worth about 15 to 16 bucks, and so?
We do not expect everyone to come back and retrieve property.
So what do you do with the property if they are not retrieved?
Right now, it's still in storage with us. We are formulating an asset forfeiture process. It hasn't been finalized, and we haven't asset forfeitured anything yet.
When do you think you would have it finalized?
I don't have an estimate on that, but when we do, we will come back to the committee, and we will be speaking with our partners in the advocacy groups.
I appreciate that. I will now turn it to Councilmember De La Rosa, who has several questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the administration for being here today. First, I wanted to just clarify, DSNY, Ryan, thank you for being here. In your testimony around Intro 1253, which is the bill that I'm introducing, I just wanted to clarify that the legislation that we're presenting today doesn't say 2 feet from an obstruction. It's as close as possible to that obstruction as possible, and it also does not amend the 12-feet pedestrian crossing that already exists in law.
Thank you for that clarification, member. And one, I'm sorry if there was any mischaracterization on my part. I appreciate that. Two, what you just said as the second part was unclear to us, and that's part of what we'd like to talk to you about in the process of going through this.
Great. We're happy to talk about clarifying. It is an important legislation because we want to make sure that there's clarity as to where vendors can vend, and we also don't want people so close to the curb where they are in harm's way. As you know, many of these thoroughfares, we walked 181st together. We saw what happens there in my district, and we want to make sure that vendors are safe as well. I wanted to ask some questions around citing. Has there been a study on the citing rules at this point from any agency, a new study, updated study in recent history, in terms of where vendors can vend, any of those type of studies?
Not since we've taken over Office of Street Vendor Enforcement, but I'd like to turn this to my colleagues as well from Street Vendor Advisory Board days and before.
No, I don't believe there's a comprehensive study on in terms of citing in streets, no.
Okay, that would be an important suggestion. I think that one of the things we often hear is how impossible, how difficult it is to find a legal spot to vend. And so making sure that people who are able to vend at this time or in the future are able to easily find places where they can vend. I also wanted to ask about, oh, time's up, okay. I'm just gonna ask one more question about how complex the citing rules are. Have you all engaged vendors, coalition members around education around citing rules at this time during this administration?
I would say when we were in charge of the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement, we certainly engaged with stakeholders and did outreach often in person directly in business corridors. We also collaborated very closely with the Small Business Services. I think some of the checklists that my colleague mentioned that provide guidance on what the citing rules are. And I also note that on that landing page that my colleague mentioned too regarding citing, that the city has provided maps to New Yorkers to understand where they're allowed to vend depending on what type of license they have in hand.
Great. And just to reiterate, I know myself, I know a lot of my colleagues who are here today, we want to be part of the solution. We want to help streamline and make those apps or tools better and more user-friendly for our community. Language access continues to be a challenge for us, and so please see us as a resource and as part of the solution in this problem. We know it's a difficult conversation, but we are not afraid of difficult conversations, and I think, as I stated in my opening statement, these vendors are the heart and soul of our communities. We want to make sure that vendors are thriving, that they're recognized as small businesses, and we know that that conversation also has to happen in our communities with brick and mortar small businesses as well. So thank you so much for being here today.
Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm clear that NYPD is not involved at all anymore. Is that correct? Because most people don't know who to call, so if they're complaining, they just call NYPD.
Councilmember, the NYPD still has a role in vending enforcement, and I'd like to break that out real quick.
If you could.
The Office of Street Vending Enforcement has sanitation, as inheriting it from Department of Health and DCWP, doing the civil enforcement around general and mobile food vending. That does not include when we encounter counterfeit goods. That does not include when we find contraband or drugs. Those are things that we do, of course, refer over to the police department. The police department also still has the authority to enforce any civil and criminal law on the books in the city. So while it does not have the Office of Street Vending Enforcement, it is not the primary vending enforcement arm, it still has the authority to engage in vending enforcement.
Okay, so because I know the vendors complain that they see a lot of NYPD. So NYPD doesn't get involved then unless you let them know that there is something that's illegal, or what would be the other instance? I don't quite understand.
NYPD can observe, as they do through their precincts, conditions throughout their district, throughout the precinct catchment areas. It is something that is still, of course, like what precinct officers would do, look for conditions on the street and address. I can't speak for the PD and how they operate that.
Okay.
I can say that in terms of what you see with DSNY and the NYPD, we have that partnership on contraband and counterfeit because it's not us, and we
No, I
shouldn't
understand
have
that part.
Yeah.
It's the other part of confusion for the public, but let's leave it at that. I just think that's something that has to be worked on. Number two, just bricks and mortar, because obviously we all have a lot of them. Is there education going, because they always complain there's a fruit vendor outside when I am selling fruit. That's the normal complaint. And it seems to me that, first of all, there may be room for both. At the same time, I don't want to hurt the bricks and mortar. So is there an ongoing discussion with the bids and with others who represent them, chambers of commerce, about vending? Who would take that on? Would it be consumer, you, health, who?
So, member, as the commissioner stated at prior hearing, DSNY is not the primary outreach and education agency for vending.
It was all one administration last I checked.
Well, we say that only because on the enforcement mechanism that we do, we stick to working on compliance and enforcement. We partner with Small Business Services, DCWP, and DOHMH, as Small Business Services in particular has led on doing work in communities with bids in chambers of commerce and vending.
Okay, so they're supposed to be the lead agency on education for those two entities.
They have a very big role in that, ma'am.
Okay. And then finally, obviously the bill that I was talking about, the pre-considered, it's to prohibit street vending on bridges. That's what DOT, I know you're not DOT, but do you have any knowledge? Can you explain why they would propose no vending on bridges? And do you have any opinion on what we're considering, which is limited vending with certain qualifications?
I'd like to tackle your last question first, member. We don't yet have an opinion. We haven't had a chance to sit down and assess what the intro was that came to us, which we will be doing after this.
Okay.
And as I stated before with the chairperson, when the rulemaking process was begun, it was DOT, but with stakeholders like DSNY and NYPD supporting it after what we had seen as major congestion, usability, cleanliness issues on the bridge. It is something that we have enforcement out every day because the bridge at points of it is just not passable and just not usable. We take this concern very seriously for that reason.
Oh, so you look at the pre-considered intro and let us know. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. First, I just, want to thank the Street Vendor Project for all of your advocacy, the street vendors que toman su tiempo para venir aquí y participar, the street vendors who take their time to be here and listen and advocate for their conditions. And I want to ground my questions in that instance. My mom sent me a video just last week of an enforcement action on Broadway in the Bronx that was truly heartbreaking. It was a street vendor who had her fruits and vegetables confiscated. She had a crying baby next to her. She looked like she was at the verge of tears. And it's just heartbreaking because she wants to do the right thing, but clearly that situation still occurred. So in the context of just understanding how DSNY is using these goods, you mentioned in your testimony 100,000 pounds of produce since April 1st have been donated to food pantries. Out of what denominator? What is the amount of goods, of fresh goods that have been confiscated?
Councilmember, thank you for that question. Let me try and do a denominator for you correctly just by combining the pounds of produce, 100,000, about 108,000, and the 2.9 tons of food that we have put into the organic stream. Like, that's the total of it. So the vast majority of the weight we're getting is, of course, untouched produce because you can't donate if it's not untouched. But that I don't know how to say compare the two then, except that know that if it is cooked food, we are making sure it gets into the organic stream in some way. But it's a large amount that's been donated. And I could provide very happily the list of food pantries we've been working with citywide, and we're always open to more if they're in the community that you'd like to make us aware of.
Thank you so much. And then the second question is, you describe a warning first and enforcement second approach. So just understanding what exactly that means. What are you warning folks about? Is it just citing regulations? What about food safety? What exactly are you saying to folks? And second, related to a question that our chair asked on language accessibility, do folks speak the language that our vendors are speaking?
On the second question first, ma'am, as I said before, we have fluency on our sanitation police staff in Spanish and Mandarin. We do use a language service, call translation service, to make sure that if we encounter someone who doesn't speak either of those languages or English, we can communicate with them in their native language. And on the warning to enforcement approach that was described before, yes, we do warnings in one of two ways. Some is a posting in the neighborhood before we come in for an enforcement action, which is 24 hours before. Some is direct engagement. When it's direct engagement, which is what I believe you were particularly asking about, we explain what the infraction is that we're seeing, and we give vendors notice that we will come back and look for compliance. If we come back and don't see compliance still, at that point in time, we engage, and that's when often we find out about licensed versus unlicensed. If we encounter unlicensed in that situation, we do engage in a confiscation. But I think that was, and I believe that was where you were trying to have me just spell that out. I want to make sure I spelled it out for you.
No, that is helpful. And Chair, if I may, but enforcement of what, right? There's so many rules and regulations related to vending. What are you looking for as a Department of Sanitation?
Everything that could apply to a general vendor or a mobile food vendor on the street in terms of how they are supposed to be cited and how they're supposed to be operating. I will offer that you had mentioned sanitary conditions before. Some of the some things did not come to us, such as my colleague Corinne can speak to that. We're not qualified to say what is a sanitary cooking situation versus not. Department of Health does food inspections for that. But I'm talking about the rules around how a cart or an apparatus is supposed to be cited and operated generally.
Okay. And if I may, the last question is a multi-parter. Thank you, Chair. A broad question for the three of you as representatives of the entire administration. Do you believe that our street vending regulation system is fair today? And part two is, given that there are an estimated at least 20,000 street vendors in the city of New York by a 2015 estimate. We know that number is higher, but given that there are an estimate over 20,000 street vendors in New York City today, and local law 18 of 2021 would increase the number of permits by 4,000 permits, not getting us near to the amount of street vendors that we have out in the street, what do you believe that the impact of implementation of local law 18's increase in permits will accomplish by 2032, and what else do you think we need to do?
That was a complicated question. I will say, and an important question. I know, Council Member, that you have a bill addressing lifting of the cap, and we're not, and implicit in your question are issues that are related to your bill, and we are reviewing and are not prepared to comment on that now. In terms of whether the regulatory system works, from the perspective of food safety, I would like to say to the vending community that's here and to New Yorkers that we do see good compliance with food safety rules. And as you've all commented on, vendors provide a vibrant food, a variety of foods for all of us, and we do see good compliance with food safety requirements.
Member, I would offer that the enforcement scheme is the enforcement scheme, and we're beholden to it to do that. As changes come down to it, we will adapt, of course, and we'll make sure those regulations are updated online. But our role is to make sure that if it's on the books, we're looking at that. I don't have a comment on licensing or whether that would increase or not. I don't think I'm the right person or DSNY is the right agency to comment. We continue to engage in enforcement as we do.
Thank you. Well, I don't think it's fair. I think we need to lift the cap, and I look forward to more conversation on that. And you know, New York City, as folks have heard me say, New York City is the only jurisdiction that regulates street vendors with a cap system the way that we do. It's not working for us. Nobody else does it. So I just look forward to more conversation on moving street vending forward in New York City. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Farias.
Thank you so much, Chair. Just to piggyback a little bit off of Councilmember Sanchez's questions, has the agency or the administration, any of the agencies in front of us, ever looked at different ways to collaborate or to create opportunities, cooperatives, et cetera, from the street vending community? If there has been almost a decade, if not more, of efforts to not lift the cap, what are the ways that the administration has done to create opportunity in this community?
I think a good example of this is perhaps the community vending marketplaces proposal that was in the Street Vendor Advisory Board report, and which I feel is being implemented by our partners at DOT at Corona Plaza. I think this is an innovative way to figure out how we can maximize public space while also keeping in mind that we want to make sure that food safety regulations are there, that public safety through regulations are there, but that we're working collaboratively with our street vendor advocate partners and local community-based organizations.
Sure. I mean, in that report, there were also different responses on what reform and modernization of street vending regulations look like. Can you tell us any more other than this one example, or any updates on the rollout?
Well, I think many of them were legislative and I think are a part of this package today. Generally, I think what we found a lot of consensus on from both sides, from brick and mortar and from street vendor advocates, was that there are unnecessary burdens. There are bookkeeping requirements that are not fair, so to speak. There are limitations on being able to have an umbrella out on a hot day. There are, these are the considerations that I think we were able to find consensus on in the street vending landscape. And I think, as you heard from myself and my colleagues, these are certainly proposals that we support or are open to engage with.
Okay, and so I just wanted to do just a quick check on some of the logging of how we do a compliance check and the warning. When do we identify what language needs to be responded to in case we need to go back for an enforcement action? Like, how are we assuring that, like, the enforcement action is going readily with people that speak the language that were given the warning?
Remember, when the interaction between the sanitation police officers and the vendor occur, so in that, When we're doing a direct engagement, we've spoken with the vendor first, we know, and we'd know when we come back. If we've posted a warning in the area and we're coming back to do enforcement, if we see infraction still, at that point, that is the first touch that we have a translation for, and I appreciate the point and the question on that, and I will come back to you with a little more on that.
Okay, great, because I just want to know, like, does that mean that we say Spanish speaker here? In case we have to go back, we go back to that original log and make sure we assign a person that actually speaks that language? Or do we end up in a situation where we have a language barrier and an enforcement action?
And member, forgive me, even if I don't have the person on the team who's fluent in that, everyone has the language services application to be using.
Got it. Respectfully, as someone that uses language translation for local government, not always great. So that's why I'm just trying to ask. And then just my last question. In DSNY's testimony around intro 1264, you stated that you folks only issue civil violations for vending infractions and will only engage in civil summonsing when conducting vending enforcement. I guess my question is around removal of the criminal misdemeanor penalties. So you folks received now the regulatory measures or the jurisdiction of street vending. Are you saying to me that all of the previous misdemeanor penalties are now waived and you're starting new? Or, right, so in response to that, how do we then backdate misdemeanor penalties or ensure that they can be waived or removed through DSNY now?
I don't know how to answer that question, and I'm going to have to come back to you with that. I appreciate it. I don't know if there is a backdating or waiving for things that had happened previously. I do know that from the date we took over on April 1st, no more criminal summonsing was going to be issued by OSVE for that. So let me come back to you, member.
Okay.
Thank you.
A quick clarification on that. We did not issue any criminal summonses either when we had the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement.
Okay, so the criminal summonses come from where? NYPD? Right?
I think that was referenced
So they
earlier.
exist, and could they not impede on an applicant? They could, correct? Like impede on an application for someone in the future for their license?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if I was a street vendor that was not vending with a license, I got an NYPD criminal misdemeanor penalty, will that impede on my future application of receiving a license?
A license generally, I mean, I think licenses that we have authority over at the Department of Consumer Worker Protection, just the mere fact of having misdemeanor won't necessarily impede you or limits you from having access to a license.
Okay, I'd like to talk more about that, just because if we're seeing over 20,000 applications and there's going to be a variety of people with different resumes on what they're applying for doing the same type of job versus, who has a civil penalty, who does not, we want to ensure that everyone has equal access and opportunity to those. Thank you for the questions. We'll talk offline on the additional follow-ups, and thank you, Chair, for the additional time.
Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you. I have a broader question about the future. The generators, that's an issue. And I'm trying to think of always ways that bricks and mortar constituents can support the vendors more holistically. And one of the issues are that people don't like other generators. How can we help, maybe with funding, the vendors have green generators that are cleaner and not something that will cause a 311 call?
It's an interesting and important question. Vendors are allowed to use generators. It might be a question to pose to vendors who are here, what they need.
Okay, so you haven't thought about that at all, as an administration?
We're, as my colleagues have expressed, we are here to implement the requirements that the council has enacted.
All right, thank you. You'll see a bill on this in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Chair, thank you so much for your indulgence. No, I honestly, Really appreciate it. I just want to state on the record, too, that I just love and respect the three of you. You are excellent partners in government. You were former colleagues, and I just appreciate you in your roles and how much you love the city. So I know that I personally and a lot of us here, members, have a lot of strong feelings about this and where it should go, but love that we get to have the argument with you. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor working with you guys. Gonna miss you.
Thank you, Chair. We'll give the administration an opportunity to collect their things, and we will turn to public testimony. If you are here in person, please come up and take a seat at the table, and you may begin once the sergeant has notified you that time started. Remember to push the button on the microphone before you begin. You will have 2 minutes to testify, so please begin once the time starts. Our first panel will be Aaron Piscopink, Matthew Shapiro, Helen Hay, Mohammed Atia, Mohammed Awad, and Cleotilde Juarez.
Wait, no, what happened? Is that Erin, right?
Yes, she's the first one. This panel requires Spanish and Mandarin interpretation.
Folks, before you testify, just be mindful. I'm going to ask you to put the mics a little bit closer just because it will be translated, so we want to make sure that it is done correctly. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Give us a little bit more time. So New York City is very diverse, and we have multiple languages being translated today. So give us, which is excellent, yeah, all right, you know. So just bear with us a little bit more so that way everyone has access to what is going on. Thank you so much. Mohammed or Matt, one of you, if you can come up for a second. All right, seems like we're rocking and rolling. Once again, thank you everyone for your patience. It's going to be a long one. I started off with a bang, and we're going to end off with a bang. How about that? So, go ahead, Sarah.
Erin, you can begin.
Good afternoon, Chair Velázquez and members of the City Council. My name is Erin Piscopink, and I'm the co-chair of the New York City Bid Association. The association is comprised of the 76 business improvement districts across the city that are as diverse as the city itself. We understand that New York City has always had street vendors, small entrepreneurs who are trying to make a living and support their families. The same motivation drives our storefront businesses, including the small shops and restaurants that make our communities unique. We welcome common sense changes to laws that will make it easier for the street vendors to make a living, but only in conjunction with enforcement of siting criteria and other regulations meant to ensure things like clear path for pedestrians and distance from storefront businesses. I'll comment on each of the bills. We support Intro 1060 and pre-considered Bill 4381, which would limit vending on bike lanes and bridges. We also support Intro 1062 and 1188, which provide greater flexibility to street vendors in their display of goods, bookkeeping requirements, and employees. While we generally support the decriminalization of street vending, we do want to ensure that agencies have the appropriate tools to enforce citing, health, and other critical regulations. We therefore request further conversation on Intro 1264. We have significant concerns about Intro 1253, which would allow for vendors to operate in front of obstructions. Obstruction is undefined, but we understand it to include bike racks, planters, bollards, and other street furniture. We believe that this significant change, without consideration of clear path requirements, visual clutter, and the usability of street furniture, would be unwise. We hope that key agencies, bid leaders, and other key stakeholders will be consulted and that the impact of this legislation will be further studied before any action is taken. We've submitted slightly longer testimony and look forward to working together.
Thank you.
My name is Matthew Shapiro, and I'm the legal director of the Street Vendor Project at the Urban Justice Center. I'm pleased that many of the bills being discussed today will start to correct the double standard that has long existed in regards to the regulation of street vendors compared with other small businesses. For example, we strongly support Intro 1062, which would repeal the requirement that vendors produce their records of daily sales, purchases, and expenses. Other businesses are not subject to such a requirement, and there's no reason that vendors should either. Intro 1062 also repeals the confusing language about general vendor stands and clarifies that general vendors can use umbrellas to protect themselves from the sun and the rain. Finally, Intro 1062 amends 17315C of the Admin Code to allow vendors to store items on their carts. The original intent of this law was to ensure that vendors do not occupy excessive sidewalk space, and this bill will ensure that. Intro 1188, which is also extremely important, we strongly support. It requires only vendors who receive a permit or a supervisory license obtain a sales tax certificate of authority and tax clearance certificate. Currently, there are many vendors who obtain a license who are just workers, who have nothing to do with paying the sales tax of the business. They should not be required to obtain a sales tax certificate of authority. Currently, they are required to, and they're required to file their sales tax returns, putting 0 because they're not paying the sales tax for the business as an employee. And if they forget to file, which happens fairly often, they're subject to late fines and fees. This bill should go a step further and also amend Admin Code 17310 to ensure that only vendors who renew a permit or supervisory license are required to provide a tax clearance certificate, not just in their original application. We support the intent of the pre-considered intro to regulate vending on city bridges. We're concerned about the 20-foot distance between vendors. There used to be a law many, many years ago in 1977 that required 20 feet of space between vendors on the sidewalk. This law was struck down as unconstitutionally vague. So we're willing to work with the council member to come up with some way to make sure that vendors can exist on the Brooklyn Bridge, but without the problematic language that is probably unconstitutional. Thank you all for this important work. It's so good to see legislation coming out of the council about this. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chair Velázquez, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Mohammed Atiyah. I'm the Managing Director of the Street Vendor Project. The Street Vendor Project is a member-led organization with 2,900 street vendor members. We organize with the vendors community, we advocate for a fair and just system, and we provide essential services that the street vendors community desperately needs. For centuries, street vending has been a platform for thousands of New Yorkers, immigrants, people of color, military veterans, entrepreneurs who are seeking a chance for upward economic mobility for themselves and their families. However, for decades in our city, they've been dealing with an unfair and unjust system and arbitrary laws. The bills before you today are essential to move us forward towards a fair system where vendors are not treated as criminals and to a place where they are not fined for minor nonsense, impossible to follow rules. I want to thank Councilmember Krishnan for introducing Intro 1264 to reduce the criminal liability on street vending violations. It's a bill that we believe is important to make sure that we are treating vendors as small businesses, not as criminals. As a former vendor myself, I received several criminal tickets for very minor violations, such as not wearing my food vendor license while I'm working. Also, I'd like to thank Councilmember De La Rosa for introducing Intro 1253 that will create safer space for vendors and to make sure that they are close to the curb of the sidewalk, but in a reasonable manner. And we can't really discuss street vending without highlighting the fact that we are dealing with an outdated system that prevents vendors from accessing license and permits. Decades ago, the city placed caps on the number of licenses and permits, and that has been preventing the vendors from operating their business in a lawful way. The cap on merchandise vending licenses is set to 853 licenses, which is one of the most arbitrary numbers that the government can ever come up with. Look here at these waiting lists. More than 10,000 names on each waiting list. According to the rate that DCWP is going with, the person at the end of the general membership, the general vendor license wait list, their name is Shamjit Taj. They are likely going to receive a license in 75 years from now, towards the end of the century. Probably their grandchildren will receive that letter from DCWP. The city has tremendously failed in regulating street vending, and I think that right now we have an opportunity to step up, do the right thing, reform the system, and make sure we have a fair system for everyone. I want to thank Councilmember Sanchez and Councilmember Farias for introducing Intro 1270 and hopefully having a hearing on it in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Mohammed Awad. I'm a food vendor and a leadership board member of the Street Vending Project. I have worked as a vendor since 2010, the same year I immigrated from Egypt. Since I started working as a vendor, I learned that the vending system is so difficult, it's impossible to get permit from the city, and some of the rules are impossible to follow. First off, I want to thank Council Member Krishnan for introducing the Intro 1264 to reduce the criminal liability because we are small business owners, we are hard working New Yorkers, we are not criminals and we shouldn't treat it as such. And this issue as a person, for me, as back in 2010, I was arrested. Yes, I was arrested because I forgot my license at home and I didn't have it on me when a police officer asked me for that. So I detained and I had to spend a whole day in the criminal court jail. And was I arrested as a criminal just because I forgot my license? Also, I want to thank Council Member Rosa for introducing the Intro 1253 to clarify the curb rule and allow the vendor to set up 2 feet from the edge of the sidewalk. It's already difficult to find legal location on our sidewalks, and sometimes we receive tickets from many minor violation like this. And for our safety as a street vendor, it's very tiny room for someone who gonna spend hours working in the same spot. Finally, I want to talk about the fact that after being a vendor for 13 years, I don't have my own permit. I have to deal with the underground market, rent somebody permits and pay for cash under the table, and the city knows about that, and they not offering any help, doing anything about that. Now, after local law 18 that passed 2 years ago, I finally have a chance to be on the wait list, and my wait list number is 2,846.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry for that, but I'd like everyone to be mindful. There are about over 80 people testifying today. So, I think we all want to get home at some point. And so I'd love for you to submit that to us in written form so we do include it in today's hearing. And thank you so much for coming out and explaining your experience. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mohammed, can you come in? Thank you.
I know,
Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. 5 languages is amazing.
A ver, pero vas a hablar. Por favor, habla, déjame espacio para yo poder, ¿ok? Interpretarlo en inglés.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Mi nombre es Clotilde Juárez.
Wait. Stop. Turn on the mic.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Clotilde Juárez. Soy madre de 3 menores de edad de entre 8 y 14 años. Formo parte de la Junta Directiva del proyecto de vendedores ambulantes y ante todo he sido una emprendedora de la gastronomía mexicana en Queens. Por más de 20 años, mis chalupas han tenido han sido tan conocidas y únicas que han sido reconocidas por los medios de Eater, NY1, en Racy, etc.
Sí. Good afternoon. My name is Clotilde Juárez. I am a mother of 3 minors, ages from 8 to 14 years old. I am part of a directive board of the vendors, of the street vendors projects. And before all, I has been an entrepreneur of the Mexican gastronomy in Queens for more than 20 years. My chalupas are so unique that they've been recognized by the media, such as ITA, New York One, Resi, etc.
Gracias al comité por hospedar esta audiencia y escuchar la discusión en relación con las propuestas de ley 1253 y 1264. Y le quiero dar un aplauso a mis compañeros valientes que han venido a dar su testimonio el día de hoy. De verdad.
Deme un segundito. Aquí entonces no se da aplauso. Si quieren aplaudir, se tiene que usar la mano así. ¿Ok? Vamos a practicar una vez más. Así mismo, gracias.
Gracias. De verdad nos hubiera escuchado haber escuchado que hablaran más sobre la ley 1270, ya que creemos que es indispensable una reforma verdadera. Recordemos que han sido más de 30 años que la ciudad no ha trabajado en una reforma justa Esperamos con ansias tener una audiencia que incluya una propuesta de ley lo antes posible, tan próximo como el año entrante.
I would like to thank the committee for hosting this hearing and listening to the discussion regarding Bills 1253 and 1264. And I want to give a round of applause to my brave colleagues who came to testify today. We would have really liked to have heard about Intro 1270 because we believe that real reform is imperative. Let's remember that it has been more than 30 years since the city has actually worked on a fair reform. We look forward to hearing that, to a hearing that includes the above bill as soon as next year.
Es ilógico que una ciudad como esta no haya formado un sistema bien estructurado que eduque, entrene y que proporcione herramientas tan básicas como una licencia o permiso para emprender un negocio. Me gustaría acceder a un local, ya que me gusta ser vendedora ambulante, pero no me gusta ser perseguida. No me gusta ser perseguida por la ciudad, acosada por los departamentos, por las agencias encargadas y mucho menos ser tratada como un criminal. Por muchos años he recibido multas criminales por el simple hecho de querer emprender mi negocio de comida en Nueva York. He ido a cortes criminales y tengo miedo que esto me perjudique en algún futuro. Por eso he decidido venir hoy para dar mi testimonio y apoyar la 1264 que descriminaliza la penalización de los vendedores. Gracias.
Okay, gracias.
It is absurd.
Sorry to interrupt. I know you gotta. Pero por favor, somite entonces su testimonio, porque yo sé que usted no llegó de terminar. Please submit your testimony, your written testimony, because I know you didn't get to finish. So thank you. Go ahead, ma'am.
Should I translate?
Yeah, you should translate up to where she got to.
It is absurd that a city like this does not have a well-structured system in place that educates, trains, and provides tools as basic as a license or a permit to start a business. I would like to open a local shop. While I love being a street vendor, I don't like being chased by the city, harassed by the agencies in charge, much less being treated like a criminal. For many years, I have received criminal fines for simply wanting to run a food business. I have gone to criminal court, and I am afraid that this will hurt me in the future. That is why I am here today, to express my support for Bill 1264 that would decriminalize street vending. Again, I thank you for listening to my testimony and for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think going forward, if you have the written testimony, let them say it all, and you get your full 2 minutes, and then you spend the 2 minutes translating, if you don't mind, just so that we could be consistent and be a little bit more efficient with timing. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, that's it for me.
Stop. Yeah, Mike. And please put it closer so that way we could all hear you. Thank you.
感谢维拉斯开兹主席和委员会今天给我这次作证的机会。大家好，我叫 Helen， 是来自地摊的一员，来自法拉盛以及街头小贩领导委员会的成员。我阐述一下，我强烈支持1264法案的通过。我有2个孩子，一个8岁上小学，一个18岁上大学，还有一位84岁的生活。就是在这种家庭，你们说我在外面能做什么工？可以接送孩子和照顾老人，还要交学费。为了减少家庭的支出，孩子不能选择自己喜欢的学校、昂贵的学费的学校去上学。然而，就在这种情况下，对于我们摆地摊卖货，还要接受刑事的罚单，是犯罪。 这让我感到了极度的恐惧和抑郁。除了下雨下雪，我们不管什么天气，严寒酷暑，就包括生病了，我们都要出去。我们只是一个老老实实做一点小生意来谋生的人，这犯的是什么罪？我们是努力工作来谋生，为我们社区做贡献，支持我们现有的经济不景气。我们只是为了养家糊口。现在你们却动用大量的警力来镇压我们这些小摊贩。我亲眼所见，在光天化日之下，在抢匪和警察距离不到10米的位置，就可以实施抢劫，无视法律。警察却不知道，为了驱赶我们，给我们开罚单，警察可以每1个小时出动1次。事实上，是不是黑白颠倒？警察是不是真的没有比打压我们更重要的事情来做？警察的职责是什么？
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
No. Your mic is off. There we go. And if you can get closer to it.
So, thank you, Chairwoman Velázquez, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to testify today. Hello, everyone. My name is Helen He. I'm a street vendor from Flushing and a member of the Street Vendor Project's Leadership Board. I'm here today to express my strong support for Bill number 1264. I have 2 children. One is 8 years old and is in elementary school, and the other one's 18 and is going to college this year. I live with my 84-year-old mother. As you can see, I have a family that depends on my work to get by. My options for work are limited. What job is there for me so that I have time to pick up the children and take care of my elderly mother? Tuition fees need to be paid, bills need to be paid. In order to reduce family expenses, my children cannot go to the school that they want to go to, the more expensive schools. In addition, it's a crime for us to be vendors. Who sell goods to make an honest living. And to top it off, we face criminal fines. I feel extreme depression and frightened by all this. We go out no matter what the weather is, whether it's freezing or scorching hot. We're just people who are trying to make a living doing honest work. What crime have we committed? We are vendors who contribute to our community and are supporting our current economic downturn, and now you're using a large police force to suppress us small vendors. I've seen with my own eyes that robbers can rob from less than 10 meters away from the police in broad daylight. While the police would come to raid us every hour. I believe this is black and white in terms of the law. Right? So I believe she ended here.
I have a couple of questions. And Erin, if you could come back and join us, thank you. So my first question, Street Vendor Project. Can you tell me when you first started and how many street vendors have come under your purview?
Sure. So the Street Vendor Project was founded back in 2001, and since 2002 we started recruiting street vendors as members. We have a bit more than 2,900 members.
So of that 2,900 vendors, how many have you facilitated licensing for?
That's a great question for our legal director, but will likely take us some time to get you the numbers.
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers today, although we recently have been keeping spreadsheets of all of our legal and small business services. But facilitating licensing for general vendors is extremely difficult and often doesn't happen because there's a cap on general vendor licenses. For food vendors, it's much more common, and we help vendors frequently, many times a month, apply for food vendor licenses.
Do you have the number in front of you
No,
as to
sorry.
what the food vendor would be?
I can get it for you.
Okay, yeah, please let us know. And of that, how many of them are the green cart, fresh cart licenses that came out this year?
Yesterday, I helped someone apply for a green card license. He's here, Ahmed Murad, right there. Green card permits, sorry. The problem with the green card permits is you can't just sign up and get one whenever you want, even though they're available. The health department has an extensive wait list scheme. So you can only get on the wait list when the health department opens it. This is a problem. The wait list should just be open because there are permits available. It's the only kind of permit, or one of the only kind of permits that you can actually get. So there should be some changes to that program.
What changes do you think?
If a vendor wants to get a green card permit and the number of permits are available, which they are, you should just be able to go get one. You shouldn't have to wait until the health department opens the waiting list, which only happens every 3 or 4 or 5 years. And it's only open for a limited amount of time. And if you don't get on or you don't know about it, then you're not able to get a permit.
Do you keep a track of the folks that do come in and are part of that wait list? So when it is open, you notify them?
Yes, we have a list. We keep track now of everyone that comes in and what they talk to us about. But it's very rare, honestly, that the green card waiting list is open. It's every I don't know, every 4, health department should know, every 4 or 5 years maybe. So it's not.
What's your collaboration with not only the health department, but certainly now when we're talking about the shift between DCWP with enforcement to DSNY, what has that shift looked like for you guys? And the outreach with your vendors and notifying them of that change?
So starting with the health department, our relationship has been, I would say, tricky in a way, because we have been reaching out to them since the passage of Intro 1116, Local Law 18, trying to get a timeline and a sense of the implementation of the law. However, we were never given any information before the announcement about the public hearing that took place 24 hours before the implementation date assigned by the local law, which happened on June 30th, 2022. We have requested a lot of information about the process. However, we have not received that. But afterwards, every time we reach out to them, we have to submit a FOIA request for any information we would like to get. So that's DOH, MH. In terms of DSNY, we have a pretty good relationship in terms of communications, understanding the processes, and especially in the first several months, we have been in constant communication with them. And thankfully, that was very helpful for us to explain to our members what they should expect and anticipate in terms of the enforcement shift, especially that a lot of the questions were unanswered for several months from the agency itself.
And your relationship with DCWP?
Since the transition of enforcement, it's been pretty limited. Probably we interact only in the Street Vendor Advisory Board, which has met only once since the report was released back in May 2022. And sadly, this meeting was pretty short because we had one agenda item to evaluate something that did not exist, which was the rollout of the new supervisory licenses. So we had a meeting with all the board members, and the conversation was about the rollout, and the rollout haven't happened by the time we had the meeting, so there was nothing to discuss, and that ended at that.
And so when we're talking about collaboration with DOT, especially when today's conversation with the Brooklyn Bridge component, and certainly with Councilmember Brewer and Ferrarias's bill, what kind of conversations have you had with DOT on that?
Yeah, we've talked to DOT several times about the Brooklyn Bridge. I personally went to the bridge with DOT folks and walked up and down it. That was maybe last year. And we talked about it. We testified against the proposed ban. We're thankful to Councilmember Brewer for her introduction and want to talk more with her office about how we can make that happen.
And then where we're talking about a clear path requirement given the expanded areas granted by 1253, what do you think about that?
The 16-foot
Yes.
clear path requirement?
Yes.
Yeah, so we need to go back and measure many spots on the bridge. We did it once before, but we want to make sure that there's enough spots that are at least 16 feet in width. We acknowledge that there needs to be regulation there. Something that the city could also do is increase enforcement on the general vendor size rules. So general vendors are only allowed to occupy 8 by 3 feet of space. There are a lot of vendors that are taking more than the allowable space, and that's what's contributing to the crowding. If more enforcement was directed to that, then that would solve a lot of the problems.
What's the proper form of enforcement, and who should be the right agency in enforcing?
It should be a civilian agency. It depends, right? So for food safety, it should be the health department. Are you asking whether I think the sanitation department is the right agency?
I'm just asking, in a perfect world, when we're talking about enforcement for street vendors, not only the right agency, but how would you see a proper enforcement looking like for each type of vendor when we're talking about food and or general?
Sure. Thanks, Chair, for the question. So in terms of food and food safety, it makes all the sense that DOHMH is the appropriate agency to oversee that. I don't think we have any problem with them being the main agency here. But in terms of like other vending rules, in terms of time, place, and manners, in terms of all of the other citing rules, it makes sense for a civilian agency to be in charge. But the only problem we have is that regardless which agency is taken over, as long as the system is impossible to comply with, it won't matter much. I'll be very honest and very frank here. Of course, we don't want to send police officers with handcuffs and firearms to interact with the vendors. We don't see that in the restaurant industry. I've never seen a cop walking into a brick and mortar and asking the manager to hand over their ID or write them a criminal ticket or arrest them for any violation. Sadly, that happens with the vendors. So we don't want to see that kind of enforcement taking place within the vendors community, as workers, as small businesses, but also as long as the system itself is not functioning, the rules themselves are impossible to follow, any sort of enforcement coming out will be very excessive and very, very punitive towards the street vendors community.
And so just Matt, earlier when we were talking about, it was intro 1253 in regards to obstructions, when we're talking about like the bollards and putting yourself in front. So that was what I meant. So in regards to that, what do you think is a proper spacing?
Oh, I think the bill is as good as it's written. I mean, I feel like vendors need to have some adequate distance allowable from the curb. It's also to clarify the rule, because right now it doesn't say that vendors must abut the curb. It says that vendors have to be on the part of the sidewalk that abuts the curb. No one really understands exactly what that means. If they wanted to say abut the curb, they could have just written that, but they didn't. So there was something else going on there. Oath, the administrative tribunal, sometimes interprets it to mean 18 inches. 2 feet is a good distance. However, there's lots of obstructions on the sidewalks often. Sometimes there are planters placed on purpose, sometimes by building owners to kick out vendors. There are bollards placed for security. So in those instances, especially when vendors had been there before the obstruction, which happens a lot, we don't want vendors to lose their spots because it's very, very difficult to find a legal spot. 10 feet from every crosswalk, 20 feet from every building door. You can't vend in a bus stop, which sometimes makes whole blocks off limits. We want to give vendors a little bit extra space. So if there's an obstruction, they should be as close as possible as they can to the obstruction. They shouldn't vend in the middle of the sidewalk. They shouldn't vend up against the brick and mortar's property. They need to be on the part of the sidewalk that abuts the curb, but more clarity, either 2 feet or as close as possible.
And when you're talking about these, are you considering pedestrians or even pedestrians that have either mobility issues, or even when we're talking about like parents with strollers?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a parent with a stroller. I live in Jackson Heights, so I know all about it. I think absolutely. So there needs to be enough space for pedestrians. We think the 12-foot sidewalk width requirement, along with the rule that you have to be near the curb, is enough. And remember, it's not just, we're not talking about the whole sidewalk here. We don't live in the suburbs. We live in New York City. You're walking down this sidewalk. There's going to be lots of stuff. There's going to be scaffolding. There's going to be bike racks. There's going to be city bike. There's going to be planters. There's going to be all sorts of things. There's also going to be spots where there's maybe 8 feet or 10 feet of space occupied by a vendor. So for that space, yes, the sidewalk will be narrowed for that 8 or 10 feet. That's a reality of the city we're living in. We want to make sure that vendors aren't in the middle of the sidewalk. They need to be by the curb. But there are other things on the sidewalk besides pedestrians, and those other things, like all the stuff I mentioned, are really important for the city, just like vendors.
Okay, and then right now, how much space does DOHMH, sorry, put a chocolate in my mouth. How much do they require right now from the curb?
I'm not exactly sure. Different agencies have different interpretations of that curb rule. Oath has interpreted it as 18 inches. Once I heard that the police department said 1 foot. I don't really know, which leads to this bill to try to make it clear, to give a distance. So I don't know what DOHMH requires. We'd have to ask them.
Okay.
And then I think back to my enforcement question, just because I want to know what works in your experience. And so what do you think is a fair but effective enforcement? And what does it look like for your vendors?
Probably something that might be surprising to some people here, that a lot of our members are supportive of fair enforcement. They don't want to say we want to have a free-for-all. They don't want to say the enforcement should never exist. Enforcement and compliance is something that our members advocate for. The only problem we have in our city is that you have a set of rules that are impossible to follow. For example, the lack of license is the biggest piece. I can't obtain a license from the city to operate my business in a lawful way. And however, the same city, probably the same city agency, is sending an inspector or an officer at the same day, giving me a $1,000 fine for not having the license that they are not providing.
Just to add on that, perfect world.
Perfect world.
Perfect
yeah.
world.
Give me an example.
Licenses
Like,
and permits are available. Vendor is vending without a license. They get a ticket, and the inspector says, "Go apply for your license," and the ticket will be thrown out. That would be a perfect world.
And that's fair and effective to both of you, you would say.
Yeah, as long as the licenses are available.
So beyond that, I have a license already. Let's say this, a perfect world. I already got my license. Yeah. And I, two worlds. One scenario, I screw up. I'm sorry, my bad. And then in the other world, I keep on screwing up. My bad, and my bad, and my bad. Up to when is enough?
Right. So there's an escalating fine schedule, which I think exists for other types of business regulations. And vendors who are violating those rules, we should cut them some slack in the beginning if they don't know, or it's their first time, or there's something that preventing them.
In a perfect world, there'll be like two, right? There's one who screws up and kind of to DSNY's point, and this is where I'm getting at. The first time offense, they work through it, they have the conversation, but when someone continues to do it after they know better, how do you work? How do you see proper enforcement in that example?
Right. We don't have an issue with the current fine structure that exists. So there's a multiple offense schedule that starts and goes up to $500 in penalties for a certain number of violations. There's not a problem with that schedule. The problem is with the rules itself. So if the rules were fair, and we have opinions on a lot of the rules that aren't addressed in these bills here, but if the rules were fair to the vending community and you were knowingly violating the law, then those civil penalties should apply.
And so to my last point here, confiscation of goods.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
I would like just to add one last comment
go ahead.
regarding enforcement, which is something that already exists and taking place. And sometimes we actually have to go and fight it, that at certain point with repeated violations or license and permits, the city agencies will sue the vendor and revoke their license or permit. And that should address that concern. If there is a perfect world and folks can obtain the license and permit and they can be in compliance, but they choose to break the laws, at certain point the agencies will revoke their permit and license and put them out of business.
And that to you is fair and effective?
Right. As long as it's fair, there's a double standard that exists.
No, that's why I said fair and effective.
You bring up a very good point. So let's talk about the health department revoking permits, the difference between restaurants and food vendors. The law, as it's written right now, gives the power to revoke a restaurant's health department permit for serious and repeated violations. They can bring a proceeding before oath and revoke their food service establishment permit. Right now, for vendors, the health department has the power to revoke a vendor's permit for one violation of the administrative code. It's a huge, huge double standard. We want to see the same standard apply. We want to see the same standard apply for restaurants and vendors. So that's the difference.
No. And then I think to DSNY's final point, where I think we really want to work with you on here, confiscation of goods. What has your experience been like with your street vendors? How have you worked with your street vendors in obtaining their goods? And then lastly, what's a fair and effective way of, in your perfect world, of getting those items back, and what would be a fair rate as well?
I think going back to the confiscation of goods, it is something that's sadly very detrimental to the vendors as business owners, as hard workers who probably put everything they own in that little table or that little stand that they're making a living off. However, when they are in compliance with all the citing rules, keeping the right measurements, making sure they are in a legal vending location, for the lack of license or permit, they are still subject to those fines and to the property seizure. And at certain point, they might pile up fines that are way higher than their capital that has been invested in that tent, table, merchandise, etc. And there is no way around it unless we reform the system and bring these people into the system and making sure they have a license or a permit. It is very challenging, and we understand how it could be difficult for DSNY to enforce the law right now, but that's something we heard from former inspectors at DCWP. They said we can't enforce the law on unlicensed vendors. If somebody doesn't have a license, there is no enforcement that takes place. We walk to them and we ask them to shut down and leave. That has been the enforcement mechanism by DCWP inspectors in the past, which hasn't been really effective, as we are seeing, because people need to go out and make a living. So how can we find a way where enforcement can actually work? Because right now it cannot.
In your perfect world, confiscation of goods, where would you see a fair and effective way?
If somebody, a vendor, is intentionally breaking the law and creating a safety hazardous situation, they should be held accountable. This is something that all our members agree on.
The DSNY says they mostly confiscate goods when the vendor's unlicensed or unpermitted. So if the vendors were licensed and permitted, then that would take care of, I think, a large majority of the confiscations.
Do you think the fines that they have now, or they said the storage fee of about $16 per day, do you think that's fair?
I don't think they should have to pay an additional fine. They're already paying a fine for the ticket, so we don't think there should be additional fines. Right? The fines were set by the council as proportional to the offense. Right? That's what we believe in our society. So to have an additional fine on top of that, we don't think is fair.
Okay, thank you. Now on to my colleagues.
Just a couple questions for NYC bid, if possible. I'm sorry, I don't see it here in your testimony. Oh, here it is. Your title is co-chair, correct? So did you help draft this statement and approve it?
Correct. So I am the executive director of the Grand Street Bid in Williamsburg, and then serve as the co-chair of the New York City Bid Association, which is a volunteer-run organization.
Got it. And over the last, I guess, 8 years or so, NYC Bid and you folks on the board have worked with the administration in what ways regarding street vending?
Sure. It's an issue that's important to a lot of our membership, and the way we see street vending has evolved over time. I think most recently it's important to point out that we participated in the Street Vendor Advisory Board and support, the shared recommendations that came out of that. And
okay, and in those shared recommendations, how would you best work on the licensing issue, as you called it here, premature at best? What would your recommendations be?
Regarding 1270?
Yes.
I don't feel comfortable speaking to that today. We have a working group on vending, and the co-chairs of that working group could probably speak to that better than
We'd
I
love
can.
to get a follow-up testimony.
Absolutely.
You folks have 7 days to submit something after the hearing date.
Certainly.
On better use of recommendations or better use of language in this testimony. I'm pretty offended by the statement of this bill being premature at best, when really a lot of work has to be done on this issue, and as we've seen almost close to a decade, there has been no improvements or very little improvements to actually expanding our permits and licensing. And so I resent the fact that you're saying this is premature at best, when we are here to help people every single day and move this policy forward. And if you didn't come here with a recommendation or a set of recommendations from the folks that drafted this statement, this language, in my opinion, should not have been used.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just want to join in all of Councilmember Faris's words here. It is extremely disrespectful, given everything that Councilmember Faria says, but also the expertise that there has been and exists in the City Council in me, in Councilmember Farias, as council members that represent impacted districts, but I aged 11-16. I personally have been involved in this legislation at City Hall, working with DCWP for years. So don't come here if you want to be productive and call our legislation premature, okay? Please take that back. And yes, in 7 days, would love to see follow-up that is substantive. Thank you.
We'll submit additional testimony. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Our next panel will be in person. It will require a Spanish interpreter. Irene Maria Castillo, Vincente Ventimilla, Armando Garcia, and Rosa Baclima. Please come up to the table.
So once again, I'm going to ask every participant, le voy a pedir a todos si pueden poner el micrófono un poquito más adelante para que entonces nosotros le escuchemos. Entonces, si tiene su testimonio escrito, usted tiene 2 minutos de hablar y después entonces la trasladora, entonces ella va a tener los 2 minutos para trasladarlo, ¿ok? All right, muchísimas gracias. Y para todos de nuevo que están aquí, el aplauso no se dan con las manos así, se hace así, right? Vamos a hacerlo de nuevo, all right. And that way we get, no clapping. But yeah, there we go. Muchísimas gracias. Puede empezar, señor, sí.
Gracias, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Vicente Ventimilla. Soy vendedor de Forum Road en el Bronx. Llevo 46 años en el comercio informal. Quiero agradecer a Dios primero, a la presidenta Velázquez y a este importantísimo grupo de concejales que nos están aquí apoyando. Gracias por permitirnos dar nuestro testimonio. Consideramos que es imprescindible que se aprueben las propuestas de ley 1264 y 1253 con carácter de urgente. Aprobada la primera, se despenalizaría las actuales sanciones y pasarían a ser infracciones de carácter civil. En la segunda, reformará la dimensión de espacios permitiendo dar apertura y habilitando nuevos lugares para los vendedores. En lo personal, créanme, me siento descontento y esta parte no quisiera transformarla en frustración. Esto se debe a que nosotros aspirábamos que se priorice las propuestas de ley 1270 y 1268, permisos y licencias y la integración al Departamento de Pequeños Negocios. Estas propuestas son primordiales ya que se estaría haciendo justicia a más de 30 años de abandono a este grupo vulnerable que hemos sido invisibles a los ojos de los políticos que no nos consideran como una prioridad. Somos una parte esencial de la comunidad y podemos ser la herramienta ideal para el desarrollo de los comercios establecidos. Nuestros hijos ignoran esta situación porque su inocencia es más grande que la voluntad política. Permanecer en las calles ante las inclemencias del tiempo e inseguridad, entre otros factores no favorables, es un reto a la supervivencia. El comercio informal es el primero en recibir el impacto económico porque dejamos de ser prioridad cuando se trata de escatimar gastos. Y si ser líder demanda ser cómplice de esta injusticia,
Gracias.
prefiero ser un caudillo y seguir luchando en las
Gracias.
calles con la hermandad de los vendedores. Gracias.
Gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Vicente Ventimilla. I am a vendor Fordham Road in the Bronx. I've been in this unofficial business market, trade market for 46 years. And I want to thank God and the chair, Velázquez, and this very relevant committee for allowing us to give our testimony. It is unavoidable that these bills, 1264 and 1253, are approved with urgency. Wait a minute, sorry, I lost myself here. Okay. When the first one is approved, all the sanctions will be depenalized and they will become violations of a civil character. In the second, allowing to open open new places for the vendors. In the personal, I am very discontented. I do not want to transform this unhappiness or discontentment into a frustration. And this is due to the fact that we were expecting that the proposals or the bills 1270 and 1268 will be prioritized. And we expected to be integrated with the Department of Small Businesses. And these proposals are key.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, he will submit it, and we will include it in the testimony. Thank you so much for your patience.
Ya lo pondrán todo lo del resto del testimonio. Oh, that's okay.
Espérese. El micrófono. Muchísimas gracias.
Bueno. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María Angélica Castillo Luna. Soy miembro del
Vamos a empezar de
del
nuevo.
proyecto
Espérese,
de
dame 2
vendedores.
segunditos. Espérese. Can we start again? Ahora.
¿Ahora sí?
Sí.
Okay. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María Angélica Castillo Luna. Soy miembro del proyecto de vendedores ambulantes. Soy vendedora desde hace 12 años. Vendo en la calle con la licencia ambulante, porque la ciudad no me permite sacar un permiso para trabajar formalmente en la industria. Vendo fruta picada en la 23 y Sexta Avenida en Manhattan. Siempre he trabajado con miedo por los policías, cuando los policías tenían que cuidarme a mí y protegerme en las calles. Siempre he pensado que los policías están para cuidarnos, no para tenerles miedo. Pero sin embargo yo trabajo con miedo a ver un policía porque no sé si me va a poner un ticket o quizás me lleve arrestada. Hace 12 años atrás los policías nos llevaban arrestados solo por trabajar en las calles. Nos llevaban a la cárcel y hasta el otro día teníamos que presentarnos y salir de ahí. Tengo 2 hijos que ahora están en la universidad. Cuando mis hijos eran pequeños, no sabían si mamá iba a llegar a casa o quizás llegaría al otro día porque la policía se la llevó arrestada. Hoy estoy aquí para pedirles a ustedes, que son los que toman decisiones como políticos, que están en un asiento y van a tomar una decisión importante para mí. como vendedora. Están ahí en ese asiento para proteger la ciudad, a todos, no solo a unos, sino a todos, incluyéndome a mí. Sin embargo, no han tomado esa decisión para protegerme, sino dejarme fuera de las leyes que ustedes hacen. Por eso hoy vengo a pedirle a ustedes, ya que ahora ya es hora de tomar decisiones importantes para mí como vendedora. Ya es hora de sentirme segura cuando salgo a trabajar y regresar a salvo a casa. Igual que ustedes salen de sus casas al trabajo y regresan a salvo. Igual yo quiero regresar a salvo a casa. Y decirle a mis hijos que los policías están ahí para cuidarme, no para...
Gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Cualquier parte que no pudo hablar, por favor, lo somete por nuestras agencias. Gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Angelica Castillo Luna. I am a member of the Street Vendor Project, and I have been a vendor for 12 years. I sell cut fruits on 23rd and 6th Avenue in Manhattan. I have always sold with my mobile food vendor license. I ask you today, why won't the city allow me to get a permit to formally enter the industry? I have always worked in fear of the police. I have always thought that the police exist to take care of us, not to be afraid of them. But nevertheless, I work in fear. When I see an officer, because I don't know if they'll give me a ticket or arrest me. 12 years ago, the police came after me just for working and took me to jail. Got subtracted for just working, and they didn't take me to jail. I wasn't let out until the next day. I have 2 children who are now in college. But 12 years ago, when they were little, they didn't know if their mom was going to make it home, or if she wouldn't be home until the next day, because a cop took her and arrested her. That is why today I am here to ask the decision makers, my elected officials who make decisions for our entire city, who hold your position to protect everyone in the city, including me. To this day, decisions have not been made with me and my fellow street vendors in mind. We have not been protected, but left out of the laws.
Thank you so much. La próxima. Y si puede, de nuevo, poner el micrófono un poquito más adelante para que nosotros lo escuchemos. Muchísimas gracias.
If you want me to, no.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rosa Baculima. Yo soy vendedora ambulante por más de 20 años. Yo vendo tamales, arroz con leche, todo tipo de desayunos en Corona Queens. Por medio de mi trabajo yo sostengo a mi familia en el Ecuador. Le doy gracias a la concejal Mary Velázquez y al comité por la oportunidad de dar mi testimonio hoy. Yo apoyo las respuestas de la ley 1264 y la 1253, pero en mis años que estoy en este país trabajando como vendedora ambulante, yo he pagado mis impuestos, conseguí la licencia para vender comida y cuando por fin ahorré para rentar un permiso en el mercado negro en $25,000, fue que se vino la pandemia y perdí todo. Me quiero levantar de nuevo, tuve que dejar de rentar el permiso y por eso estoy aquí, para apoyar la propuesta de la ley 1270 y para exigir que el Consejo organice una audiencia que incluya la 1270 lo más pronto posible. Esta propuesta va a ayudar a que se agilice la lista de espera en que le estamos miles de vendedores ambulantes. Nuevamente les doy las gracias por aceptar mi testimonio y espero que tomen mi cuenta en mi sugerencia. Gracias.
Gracias a usted.
No, solo estoy en español.
And we did it under 2 minutes. Woohoo!
Good afternoon. My name is Rosa Baculima, and I am a vendor, street vendor. I have been a street vendor for more than 20 years. I sell tamales, milk rice, how you say? Yeah, and all kinds of breakfasts in Corona, Queens. Through my job, I keep my family in Ecuador and support my family in Ecuador. And I thank Council Member Marjorie Velázquez and the committee for this opportunity to be able to testify. I support the bills 1264 and 1253, but in all the years that I've been in this country working as a street vendor, I've paid my taxes. I got a license to sell food, and when finally I have saved enough to rent a permit in the black markets, $25,000, it was that the pandemic arrived. And I want to get up again. I had to stop renting the permit. And that is why I'm here, to support Bill 1270, to demand that the Council organizes a hearing, including 1270, the sooner the better. And this proposal is going to help to accelerate the waiting list in which thousands of us street vendors are included. Again, I thank you for accepting my testimony. And I hope that you take into account my suggestion.
Thank you so much.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Armando García, soy un vendedor del Bronx, llevo más de 20 años en este oficio, que esto me ha permitido educar a mis hijos en mi país. Tengo deficiencia renal, recibo diálisis 3 veces por semana y este año perdí una pierna. He venido aquí una vez más, solo sabe Dios si será la última. Pedimos un cambio en la legislación que provea de permisos y licencias para todos los vendedores como un acto de justicia para quienes entregamos parte de nuestra vida en las calles. Probablemente estos cambios no los vea. No quiero ser pesimista, pero mi salud se está deteriorando cada vez más. Solo quiero darles de antemano las gracias en nombre mía personal y de todos los compañeros, que es mi gran familia, los vendedores de la calle. Gracias.
Pásame el papel, por favor.
Gracias.
Thanks. Good morning, my name is Armando Garcia. I am a vendor in the Bronx, and I've been for more than 20 years doing this activity that has helped me to educate my children in my country. I have kidney deficiency, and I received dialysis ever since 7 years ago. And this year, I lost a leg. I come here once again. Only God knows if it would be the last. And we ask for a change in the legislation that provides permits and licenses for the vendors as an act of justice to those who have given parts of our lives to the street. Probably these changes, probably I won't be able to see the changes. I don't want to be pessimist, but every time my health is deteriorating more and more. But nevertheless, to know that I was part of these valiant fighters makes me feel proud. I want to end my days next to this great family nor not in a hospital, alone and abandoned. The streets have been our second home, and the streets will see me leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Next panel.
Thank you. Our next panel will be in person. Taisha McGuff, Guadalupe Sosa, Dan Rossi, Annie Z, Jennifer Salgado, and Calvin Baker.
All right, we're going to start off with
Taisha McGuff.
Good afternoon. My name is Taisha McGriff. I'm also a member of the Vendor Project, and I'm a small business owner of Tiny's Kitchen. All you need is a Tiny's Taste. And I want to thank you guys for allowing me to testify today. I'm here not to disrupt, interfere, clutter, or soil in front of any local establishment within my community. I want to be able to stand proudly alongside my fellow small business owners to provide a good service to my community with my delicious food. It's been 15 years since I applied and sent in documentation for my vendor's license, also for my merchandise. It's been 15 years, only to be told that they don't have no recollection of me even applying 15 years ago after I waited so long. To say that I never did because they only give to veterans. And if I'm not a veteran, that is impossible for me to have submitted those documentations, which was very disappointing and depressing. I'm here because it's so frustrating when I take the proper steps to get the permit, get the license, and do everything to only be told that you can there is no way you can even achieve it. I need to be able to obtain the tools that I need to be a sufficient vendor on the street. And I'm just so passionate about it because I just didn't wake up overnight and say, okay, I'm just gonna go sell food on the street. I went through the proper channels.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm really trying to stick to the 2 minute.
No problem.
I'm trying to give everybody the same grace. I appreciate it. And if you want, we're still taking testimony, written testimony through the next 72 hours.
72 hours, you may submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Guadalupe Sosa. I've been a street vendor for more than 12 years. Today, I'm here to support not only me, but my colleagues in this never-ending battle against us street vendors. Like many others, I have suffered being discriminated, humiliated, and many other never-ending names. It is time we finally get recognized as the smallest of the smallest business owners. That we deserve to finally get recognized as the smallest business owners that we are. We deserve getting properly orientated, educated, and guided in order to do the proper things the state and the city requires. We also here to talk about the amount of time we get criminal fines for vending in the street and the lack of permits and licenses New York City has a cap on till this day. We aren't criminals, just vendors trying to bring bread to our table. Also, my father was one of those who got arrested for selling in the street when I was a minor. It was a traumatizing experience to see my father get taken away from me with handcuffs, all because he was vending. And ever since then, people look at you like you're a criminal and not a vendor and not a proper resident of New York City. We do everything legal and we try to do everything legal, but there's always a limit. It's time for us to get heard and be seen. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Annie Shih, and I'm a staff attorney with the Micro Enterprise Project at Volunteers of Legal Service, or VOLS. I would like to thank Chair Velázquez and the committee for the opportunity to testify today. VOLS is a legal services nonprofit, and the VOLS Micro Enterprise Project provides free legal services to small business owners and entrepreneurs. For many New Yorkers, entrepreneurship is an effective path out of poverty and into financial stability and independence. Entrepreneurship takes many forms, including street vending, which provides crucial economic opportunities, particularly for immigrants, minorities, and veterans. The repeal of misdemeanor criminal penalties for food and merchandise vending will help ensure that street vendors do not face the threat or fear of arrest as they seek to provide for themselves, their families, and their communities. At VOLS, we hear from all types of entrepreneurs, including street vendors, about the challenges of navigating what seems like a regulatory maze. In our work, we recently learned about a licensed fruit vendor who had hundreds of dollars of produce thrown out by the Department of Sanitation, which issued 2 violations that the fruit vendor could not understand, in part due to language barriers. Another food vendor, a Black US Navy veteran on Social Security, recently approached VOLS in frustration because his food cart permit decal was stolen, and he could not access any information on what to do next. He filed a police report, but received 2 tickets for operating without a permit. These examples highlight the hurdles that street vendors encounter in addition to potentially facing criminal penalties. Beyond considering the decriminalization of street vending, we believe that expanding access to licensing, as outlined in Intro 1270, will allow street vendors to formalize and grow their businesses under a fair regulatory system. Street vendors are among the smallest of New York City's small businesses, and yet they form an integral part of our communities and our local economies. Thank you for accepting our testimony and for supporting the needs of New York City's street vendor entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for providing the space to testify before you this afternoon. My name is Jennifer Salgado, a proud Bronxite and the lead organizer at the Street Vendor Project. SEP is a member-led organization with more than 2,900 members who are working to create a vendor-led movement for permanent change. Although I am here to voice my overall support for all the bills presented today, I am here to speak on the absolute need to move forward Intro 1264, a bill sponsored by Councilmember Shaker Krishnan that will decriminalize street vending across the city. Over the past 2 years, I have been working with vendors in Fordham Road up in the Bronx, where folks have been the victims of constant harassment from the local precinct. Many of these vendors have received criminal tickets, which forced them to go to criminal court simply for not having a license or a permit. I come to this work not only because I believe in social justice, but because I draw from my own experience as a daughter of a former street vendor. When my mother arrived to this country 30 years ago, there weren't many avenues she could pursue to secure a job and sustain my sisters and I, so she turned to street vending as her father in Mexico had taught her. Being a vendor granted her the agency to be her own boss and therefore be more available and present for us, her children. In 2014, on Valentine's Day, she, along with other vendors, guess where? If you guessed Fordham, you're right. She and the other vendors present were harassed by the local precinct and later arrested. Her crime? Selling flowers and bears without a license. She and the other mothers sat in a cold cell for 24 hours before seeing a judge until they were finally released. This is what outdated laws do to hardworking mothers. I want us to take a second to recognize that this incident happened almost 10 years ago, and we are still seeing the criminalization of vendors today in the same neighborhoods. I hope that the City Council takes actionable steps that moves legislative reform forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Calvin Baker.
And while I serve as a deacon under the apostolic faith, I'm a dad, I'm a grandfather, I'm a restorative justice leader at Faith in New York. But today I come to you as a street vendor, and I am here to ask the city to consider a number of bills to make sure that me and the vendors like me have a just vendoring system in New York City that treats us with dignity, respect, and the opportunity to live the American dream, to have my own vendor business. The current waiting list is so long, and with this priority to certain population does not currently give me and the brothers and sisters I work alongside with hope. This is why I endorse the access to business licenses, which will open the doors for me as it is drafted and supported, expanding the amount of vendoring licenses to 1,500. So that's why Street Vendor Projects and dozens of other organizations are asking for street vendor reform. We are asking the city to stop criminalizing vendors, and any infractions should be civil and not criminal cases. This city has been built on the backs of blacks and brown people who have migrated here willingly, did the jobs no one else wanted to do during the pandemic. Let's not criminalize them. We ask that you support the bill to decriminalize vendoring. Vendors want to be well, and we ask that a small business service train and educate us to be the best vendors we can be. We ask that SBS to create a division to create such an office. Lastly, vendors want to operate safely, and we propose the reform public setting rule to allow us to place our stands within 2 feet from where the sidewalk meets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And like I said before, please, 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 if there's additional information that you did want to share, please submit the written testimony. You have 72 hours. So thank you for that. I did actually want to follow up a question you had said about street justice. And what does just mean for you? A just street vending program mean to you?
What does a just street vending program mean to me? For me not to feel criminalized when I come out to try to make money for my family and to pay my bills.
And so earlier we had DSNY testify that they are not issuing any criminal violations, they're only civil fines. Have you experienced otherwise, and this is from April, because they took over enforcement in April, have you heard of anybody receiving any penalties other than civil?
Yes, I have. Even though they may not be issuing it, they have police officers that are with them that are issuing it. So what makes them separate? You know, they're coming together.
To my point, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Salgado, you had mentioned your mom had gone through this situation 10 years ago. Have you had street vendors since April approach the Street Vendor Project about any criminal penalties that they have received?
Yes, as I mentioned, I have been working with the vendors on Fordham Road for the past 2 years, and it is a constant threat that actually we had to create a whole pilot program just for Fordham so that vendors can operate safely because they were under constant harassment by the local precincts.
But it was just harassment, but no real penalties, or did they receive penalties?
When I say harassment, probably should be more explicit, but they're getting criminal summons. They're getting their items confiscated by the local precinct, not by DSNY, who is in charge of vending since, as you mentioned, April 1st.
How many violations have you heard of, specifically the criminal ones that they've received?
In the summer, we had...
And since April? Because
in the summer, yeah, in the summer.
I just want to correlate the...
Yeah. In the summer, we had several vendors approach us. It was on a weekly basis. We had to approach the local council member who has been very supportive of the issue, but creating a pilot program is not the end-all, be-all solution. There needs to be legislative reform.
Are you tracking this as well?
We are tracking. And unfortunately, our organization cannot represent vendors in criminal court. So unfortunately, we do tell them this is the process that you need to take. We try to encourage folks to go to criminal court because we know that the city has worked to create safer laws for folks to do so. But there is still a great fear from all types of vendors to go to criminal court.
Thank you for sharing. Earlier, you had discussed about submitting your application over 15 years. Do you remember the agency that you submitted it to and which application you applied to?
I just know it was on Broadway by the Bull. That's how I relate to that building, right across the street from the Bull. That's the building where I applied for both my food vendor license and merchandise, what they advised me to do both, because she said I might as well do both at the same time. So I'm not sure what the address to the building is. I don't remember, but I just know anytime I go to the building, it's right next across the street from the Bull.
And you never got any of those licenses?
No, I did
you receive? Okay, sorry.
I did receive a letter about probably like 2-3 years into that stating where I was on the waiting list. And then a couple of years after that, when I went to acquire again, that's when she told me they have no recollection of me ever applying at all, and that I must be mistaken because they only letting those that veterans apply. So I'm just, the miscommunication and misleading of the same people that I'm supposed to get my documentation from is just very frustrating and very confusing. Because if they tell me one thing and then do another, is what I'm supposed to do.
What has been your recent communication with either DOHMH because you have a food license or DCWP because you do, you did apply for food and you did apply for a general?
Okay, what I did was try to contact the health department, which I did. And even they said that they don't have no recollection of nothing except for my food handling license that I had since 2007. So I don't know after the pandemic what happened after that, but it's just like everything is lost. And all the hard work that I did and all the steps that I took, all the classes I attended to work towards my license, it just went down the drain.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing. You got a question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next panel will be in person. It will require a Mandarin interpreter. It will be Wenlong Li, followed by Ai Ye Wang, followed by Liu Shan Shan, followed by Zhang Li Xia, followed by Gui Jin Ao. Thank you.
Li Wenlong. I'm not sure. I'll say again.
Yeah, say it again.
Li Wenlong. Bathroom.
Okay. Next one.
还有什么？王爱月。There's like, so I'll read a few of them. 还有刘春山。江李霞。没有，跟那个我讲的，这个是 maybe that person。还有欧桂琴。So I call all of them, but
And this one?
对，江李霞。上来吗？哦，哦，是 OK。 doesn't have a script. It'd be easier if he said something and I interpret it. Because he does it all the time.
So here, do this. You take this mic.
Okay. Okay, thank you.如果讲话的时候，你说一句，我翻译一句，这样的比较顺，好吧？是。No, I don't like. I'm sorry. There were a few that were not there. I called them names, but not everyone answered. I don't know. We couldn't record it. Why? What does that mean? Okay.
Folks, listen for your name.
大家请听一下自己的名字哈，王爱月。Okay, she's here. So, 山，对不起，刘春山。I don't see any, so this is here. 还有古金敖，或者敖古琴，您 OK? So that's 江李霞。Maybe in the bathroom. 江李霞。然后呢，还有一个李文龙。哦，这是你，这江李霞是你。
不，李文龙。
Oh, this is him.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, excuse me.
Two new ones. Okay, so this one I'm not sure.
Sorry, excuse me. He has a speech impediment. Is there any way that he can get a little bit extra time?
Oh, it's good. Tell them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. 娟叫什么？苗梅娟。苗梅娟。So, sure. 文栓湖，还是栓湖为 ？Not sure. 江李霞在那 ，so I'm not sure about maybe bathroom or something. Okay. Okay. Oh. 可以，他们会给你多点时间的。It's easier if I don't know if he has a speech impediment. In that case, it might be easier for me just to interpret after. Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. 2分钟，不过呢，我们俩是4分钟。然后您说一句，我翻译一句，这样挺好啊。
大家好，我叫李文龙，是刚7月16号刚从中国来的一名大学生。
好，稍等。Hello everyone, my name is Li Wenhong. I came from China on July 16th. I was a college student there.
Yeah, 我因为生的时候大脑缺氧引起的脑瘫后遗症，我自身有残疾。
I have a disability because when I was born, there was a lack of oxygen to the brain, so I have cerebral palsy.
我在中国上完本科以后，我通过考取美国的研究生，我来到了这里。
In China, I graduated with my BA, and I applied for graduate school, and I came here.
我爸爸在2007年因为心脏病去世了。
My father had passed away in 2007 due to heart disease.
我妈妈在2020年检测出来乳腺癌，并且我还有一个18岁的妹妹在中国上大学。
My mother was diagnosed breast cancer in 2020. I have a younger sister going to college in China.
我来到这里，我需要半工半读，然后我还需要寄一部分的生活费给到家里。
So here, I'm going to school part-time and also working part-time. I also need to send part of my savings back to China.
但是我来到这里以后，我试着去找 part-time， 找了2周，我也去试工了，但是没有人肯用我。
After I came here, I tried to find part-time job. I tried for 2 weeks, but nobody would hire me.
他们的原因大致都一样，都是说害怕我的安全问题，怕对他们造成影响。
The reasons I gave are all the same. They said that it was our safety concerns, our concern that I might affect them in some way.
我迫不得已，我只能以摆地摊的这种方式来维持我的生活跟学业，还有我的家庭。
And so I didn't have a choice but turn to vending for my life expenses, for my tuition, and for my family.
我很希望在这个国家完成我的学业，包括以后可以在这里得到我想要的工作。
I very much hope that I could complete my studies in this country and also obtain my job that I prefer.
我想请问一下，如果说我没有工作的这个权利，我上这个高等教育的拿到这个学历，我有什么用？
So if I have no opportunity to do this job, what is the purpose of me obtaining higher education?
我希望用我的双手来为我的家庭带来幸福的生活。
I wish I could, with my own 2 hands, bring happiness to my family.
所以我希望政府支持我们这些摆摊儿的，去合法的去工作。
So I wish the government would support us vendors to be able to vend legally.
因为这是我现在这个年龄唯一能想到去维持我的生活跟家庭的一种工作方式。
Because at this point in my life, this is the only job that I could think of that could sustain my life and
Thank you.
my family. Thank you.
Did he want to continue a little bit more, or he's?
有想说的吗？还是没了？
我可以再说几句。
I can continue.
I'll give you 30 seconds if that's okay. If you can speak to either your personal experience with street vending and or the bills in front of you.
可以给你30秒的时间，可以讨论，就说说自己的这个摆摊的一些经历啊，或者你希望这个法律要做些什么，都可以说说这方面的。
好的，谢谢。
Thank you.
在我8月份摆摊的时候，有一个人他经常来骚扰我要保护费，如果不给的话，他会强制的把我的东西扔掉，甚至打我。
In August, when I was vending, there was a person who came seeking protection money. If I didn't give it, would take all my things away and even beat me up.
在我也多次报警了，但是警察一来他就走掉了，甚至跑掉了，至今没有逮捕。
Okay. I reported many times to the police, but when the police came, this person would not be there, would have run away, so there was no arrest made up to this point.
是我的同胞，每次当他来的时候，我的同胞会站出来保护我，因此我后来就没有被他骚扰。
And it was my fellow Chinese who, every time this person came, would protect me. And then later on, this person no longer came to harass me.
谢谢。
Thank you.
Thank you. 大家好，我叫奥桂琴。
桂琴。
我今年71岁了。
I'm 71 years old this year.
就是几年来，通过疫情，没有那个生活出路，我就想法去摆摊。
During the pandemic, I didn't have any means of making a living, so I thought about vending.
摆摊的意思呢，我就是想这个通过摆摊，就是想这个有个生活的来源，房租啊、吃啊、零花钱，就这些。
Through vending, I hope to have some ways of making my livelihood for rent, for food, and just some spending money.
我不需要太多。
I don't need much.
但是呢，通过这几年摆摊位呢，就是警察是总盯着我，总看着，总抢。
But through these last few years of vending, the police has just been watching me, supervising me, robbing me.
有的时候呢，我就一害怕呢，就心脏犯病了，心脏有病。
And sometimes when I get scared, my heart has illness, and then I have heart disease.
但是呢，我就是也是头晕了。他们警察看到我了，他说要不给你找个救护车，我说 no。
And then I get dizzy, and the police would see me, and then would say, "Oh, why don't we get an ambulance for you?" And I would say no.
我呢就是通过摆摊，就是不需要到点了，不想给美国政府添麻烦。
Through vending, I don't want to bring any inconvenience or trouble to the U.S.
我不需要美国政府给我什么补助。
I don't need the U.S. government to give me any subsidies.
在我这个身体还可以的情况下，摆摊为自己的房租和吃住解决就 OK 了。
While my health is still good, vending allows me to pay my rent, for my shelter, for my food, and that's it.
就是这些。但是今天呢，你们政府对我们真是高抬，真是对我们一个底层的人，非常的尊重，谢谢你们。
And today, the government has been so gracious to us, those of us on the bottom society, so respectful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
你讲了，我在这儿。
坐这边。
按下去啊！嗨，大家下午好。我叫王爱月，我在弗拉逊民街摆摊，所以这几年疫情，我一直在弗拉逊下雨下雪。
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wang Aiyu. I have been a vendor in Flushing. Been a vendor since Flushing since the pandemic, no matter if it's raining or snowing.
因为我想，就说现在，疫情之前的摆摊，我们不怕。现在一看到警察，我都好像，就看到警察我都神经病了，怕得要命。警车一转过来，我都吓要命了，他就会开罚单，拿着我的东西。
And then before pandemic, there's no fear, but now whenever I see the police, it makes me extremely nervous. And then I just get, when I'm so fearful when I hear the police, I feel like they're going to take away all my things.
所以我已经58岁了，我做什么工都现在不行。做指甲，本身我会做指甲眼睛也看不行了。穿衣服我们也不行，因为颈椎不好，所以说只能在民间摆店。那所以说恳求你们能给我一个要求的合法那个证。我是一个单亲的妈妈，我有3个小孩。
So I'm 50 years old. I used to be a nail technician, but then my eyesight are not good anymore. And then I also used to be a sewer, but I can't do that job either. So I'm also a single mother of 3. And so I really just wish you to give me the opportunity to work legally.
我现在一看到警察，我好可怕。能要求你们给我一个合法的那个证，我可以帮他生活。我也没钱，只能要的是自己能给赚点钱给自己的生活就好了。
Whenever I see the police, I get really scared. And so I just want to have a legal means of working just to make enough for me to have a life.
谢谢 ，Thank you。
Thank you。
大家好，我叫姜丽霞，我在法拉盛摆摊。
Hello everyone。
然后从疫情开始没有了工作，我就开始摆地摊维持生活。
Hello everyone, my name is Jiang Li-Jia. I've been working as a vendor since the pandemic in Flushing. After the pandemic, I didn't have a job, so I started vending.
疫情期间，我老公失业了，我还有一个8岁的小孩要养，我们在没有办法的情况下才出来摆摊。
I also have an 8-year-old I need to support, so we do vending because we have no other choice.
本来我们还是可以摆摊的收入可以维持家庭，可以交房费、交电费，可以给孩子买食物，但是现在不行了。法拉盛警察每天都在查我们。
It used to be that we had made enough for us.
给我们开很大的罚单，每天都出动。我们被迫，我们每天都在逃跑。
So it used to be that we were
每天背着东西就跑，他们就追。
Okay, 稍等。So it used to be that we were able to make enough for rent.
我们就像罪犯一样。
So it used to be we made enough for rent, for electricity, for enough for our child, but ever since then, recently the Flushing police every day comes to monitor us, comes to issue these big fines, and then we would run and chase us. And so every day we would be running.
我感觉我们很勤劳，不管刮风，不管下雨，我们都努力出来工作，为了养家，为了糊口。但是警察不放过我们，每一天都在追我们，给我们开罚单，拿我们的东西。我们不是罪犯，我们是辛勤的工作者，我们也想做一个合法的、有执照的人，但是我们没有办法申请到执照，我们没有办法拿到执照。所以说，每天警察就大。
好，稍等，对不起哈。So we are really hardworking people. We go out no matter the weather, if it's rainy or windy. We have family to support, but the police would every day come to chase us, to give us these big fines and take away our things. We're really hardworking people, and we want a legal means to work, but we're not able to get the license, and all we want is just to be living not as a criminal.
我们很努力的工作，就是为了赚一点点生活费。我们需要这个工作，我们需要你们给我们合法的执照，让我们安心的生活在美国这个美丽的这个国家。
We're really hardworking people. We need this job, and we like to work this job in security. We need you guys to give us a license for us to do that, for us to live in this beautiful country.
谢谢。
Thank you.
谢谢你们。
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I've just given the translator some questions to translate for you all. So you can all take your turn. If we can move one mic closer to the young lady at the end. Okay, so she's going to ask you questions, okay? So.
好，那现在这些问题呢是问每一位在场的个人的，所以我第一个问题是你们大家都在什么地方摆摊？
发了新Queens。法拉盛，
对，
哦，缅街
，Main Street， 你们呢？
缅街
，Main Street，
这是罗斯福，法拉盛罗斯福。
Russian Roosevelt。
对，
我在法拉盛缅街。
Me too. I'm also on Main Street and also
39 Avenue， 39 Avenue
and 39th Avenue。然后 go on to that。
So the first question and that they just responded to is, where do you currently vend? So the next question is, what do you sell?
第二个问题是你们大家都在卖什么呢？
Yeah.
好，你先。
我在卖一些中国制造的帽子、手套，和一些钱包。对。
I sell some Chinese-made hats, mittens, wallets.
我也是在手套，还有围巾。
Wait, we're going to need you to put the mic.
Okay.
Thank you.
I also sell mittens and scarves.
手套、帽子、围巾。
Hats, mittens, scarves.
我在卖服装。
I sell clothes.
我卖的是服装。
I sell clothes.
服装。
The next question is, when did you apply for a license?
第三个问题，你们是什么时候申请了执照的？
因为我刚来不久，我还没有去申请这个执照。
Well, because I just came here shortly before, I have not applied for a license yet.
我还没有申请，我一直就是在怕，还都是3月份的很严格，后来我就停了6个月，都没有做工了，就是刚刚开始就11月份开把，刚刚又摆了1个月，好怕到警察就好怕。
Well, I've been really frightened because it was really strict in March, and then so I stopped working for 6 months, and so it's only starting in November for the last month that I started working there again.
Okay, so she hasn't applied for a license?
所以就说没有申请执照是吗？
我还没有申请。
I've not applied for one yet.
Okay.
我已经申请了，在疫情的时候，但是他们已经关闭了。
I applied for it during the pandemic, but they really closed it.
No, 没申请。
I do not apply.
Okay. Have you been put on a wait list? I guess you're the only one who applied. Have you been put in on a wait list?
那您是唯一的申请的人，有没有把您的名字放在那个等待名单上呢？
没有，它又关闭了。
No, it was closed.
Okay. What has your experience been with enforcement?
那你们跟执法人员的经历都有什么经历呢？
执法的时候，我第一次警察，我在摆摊的时候，就是警察，我在路边摆摊，有3个警察过来，然后我就想走，但是他们就摁住我不让我走。
Okay, shut up. Well, my vending, the first time I was doing it on the street, and then I saw the police came over. There were 3 of them. I wanted to leave, but they were pressing me down, not allowing me to leave.
When was this?
这是什么时候的事情啊？
今年大概就是4月份、5月份、5月初。
This year, around April, no, beginning of May.
然后在5月的初，他给我开了一个很大的罚单，就是 大概就是上面写的1000块，1000块。
In May, I was issued with this really outrageous amount of fine. It was $1,000. 1,000.
对，然后我从那我就不敢出来了，但是我还要需要钱给孩子买东西，我买吃的。我有晚上4、5点偷偷的跑出来卖1、2个小时。
And since then, I was too afraid to go out to do it, but I still needed money to buy things for my child, to buy food, and so I would go around 4 or 5 p.m. and then sell secretly for an hour or 2 hours.
很不幸，我又被抓住了。
But very unfortunately, I was again arrested.
他又给我开了个1000的罚单。
I'm sorry, interpretation should not be a fact. I was again found and then issued with another $1,000 fine.
How much have you paid in penalties or fines?
那这些罚单的话，你交了多少钱呢？或者这个处罚的话，交了多少钱呢？
那次罚单交了是那个地摊的协会帮我律师打下来，我交给了律师。
Well, that fine, it was handled by the vendor association for me, so it was the attorney who fought it for me.
很幸运有地摊协会的这些团队帮我们，有律师帮我们。
Very fortunately for there was the vendor association, there were attorneys who were helping us.
但是第3次，也就是还是在5月份，又给我开了罚单，并且全部拿走了我的货物。
But then in May, for the 3rd time, I was again issued with a fine and all my merchandise taken away.
我每次遇到警察的时候，我就害怕的哭，但是警察也不会理会你，你哭你伤心，然后回到家就是很无助，很害怕，就是感觉真的很怕警察。
Every time I see the police, I would cry, but then it doesn't matter. The police will ignore your tears, ignore your state. And then when I go home, I felt really helpless, very frightened of the police.
是我们一点办法都没有，我们只是希望警察不要过度的去伤害我们，因为我们不是坏人。
There's nothing we could do about it. We just hope that the police don't harm us excessively because we're not bad people.
我有时候看到有的人在偷东西，在抢劫，警察并没有及时到，但是对于我们地摊，他们每天都在管，他们这种把这个时间和精力用在我们地摊上，我感觉很不公平。
I see people stealing, robbing, but the police is not taking care of those promptly. But for us vendors, they are controlling or monitoring us constantly. I feel like they could spend their time and energy better elsewhere.
我需要你们帮助我们这些地摊人，帮助我们拿到就是能合法的一个证，让我们不这么每天担惊受怕的去摆摊去生活。
I hope that you can help us obtain, vendors help us obtain a license so that we could live legal lives, so that we do not live in fear every day.
就在上个月，我又出来摆摊的时候，就是一个下雨天。我刚刚出了摊，然后我就用雨布包上了我的货，因为下雨我不能卖，我一件都没卖。很不幸，警察又来了。
So last month, when I was vending, it was a rainy day, so I had covered my merchandise, and I wasn't selling, I didn't sell anything, but very unfortunately, the police came again.
我告诉警察我没有卖，我包上了，但是我没有，今天一件都没有卖，但是警察不听，他还是全部把我的货物全部拿走，然后给我开了250块钱的罚单。
I told the police that my merchandise was covered. I did not sell any item, and the police would not listen to me at all, still had issued me a fine of $250.
就是每天这样生活，我感觉很沮丧，很难。
I find it so hard to live like this every day. I feel really depressed. Okay, right?
本来我是一个就是很阳光的，就是很喜欢很阳光的，对什么事情都很乐观的。但是警察一次次这样对我们，我觉得生活的很沮丧，很艰难。
You know, I used to be a really positive person, very optimistic, but through these experiences with the police, it's made my life so hard, so depressing.
我迫切的希望你们能帮助我们这些艰难的地摊人，给我们一些帮助，谢谢你们。
I really strongly hope that you can help give us vendors some help.
谢谢你们。
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you all.
感谢大家。
Our next panel will be in person. It will require a Wolof and Bangla interpreter. It will be Ibra Diagni, MD Rahman, Mohammed Haik. Please come to the table.
So once again, I kindly ask to bring the mic close. So I just want to ask, do you have a written statement? He does have a written statement? Okay, so since he has a written statement, we'll give him 2 minutes to read his statement, and then 2 minutes, then you will translate that statement.
এখানে কি মোহাম্মদ রহমান আছেন? এখানে কি মোহাম্মদ রহমান আছেন? থাকলে এখানে টেবিলে আসেন। আচ্ছা, ওকে। Should we start?
শুভ সন্ধ্যা। আমার নাম মোহাম্মদ হক। আমি কুইন্সের ওজন পার্কে থাকি। আমি বাদামের কার্টে কাজ করি 33 নম্বর রাস্তা 7 নম্বর অ্যাভিনিউতে। আমার ওয়াইফ আর আমার 4 বাচ্চা, তবে তারা কেউ কাজ করে না। আমি উরবান জাস্টিস সেন্টারের স্ট্রিট ভেন্ডর প্রজেক্টের মেম্বার।
My name is Mohammad Haq. I live in Queens Ozone Park. I sell carts. I sell peanuts at the cart. 33 street number, and it's on 7th Avenue, 33rd Street and 7th Avenue. I have wife and 4 children. No one else works in the family. I'm a member of the Urban Justice Center Street Vendor Project.
আমি 33 নম্বর রাস্তায় বিটুইন 7 এবং 8 অ্যাভিনিউর মধ্যে কাজ করি ম্যানহাটনে। অনেক বছর আমি কাজ করেছি এই রাস্তায়, কিন্তু এখন আমাকে ওই জায়গায় বসতে দেওয়া হয় না। ওয়ান পুলিশ প্লাজা সিকিউরিটি এবং পুলিশ এসে আমাকে উঠাইয়া দেয়। গত 2 মাস আগে পুলিশ সিকিউরিটি এসে আমাকে বলে তোমাকে অ্যারেস্ট করে নিয়ে যাব, অথবা তোমার কার্ডটাও আমি নিয়ে যাব তুমি যদি এখান থেকে না যাও। আমি অনেক রিকোয়েস্ট করলাম, তারপরে আমাকে ওরা বসতে দিল না, শেষ পর্যন্ত আমি চলে যেতে হলো।
I work between 7th and 8th Avenue on the 33rd Street. I've been working in Manhattan for many years, but they don't let me work there anymore. One Penn Plaza security and police were after me.
যদিও এটা খোলা জায়গা, তারপরও আমাকে বসতে দেয় না। এখন আমি সাপোর্ট করি যে 1264 এবং 1253 বিলে আমি সবাই সাপোর্ট করি, এবং আপনারা যারা আছেন সবাই এই বিলে সই করবেন। ধন্যবাদ বেলাউন্সকে এবং কমিটিকে।
I'm sorry, আপনি কি এখান থেকে বলছেন? যদি এই জায়গাটা although that spot that I work at is open and I have a license permit, but still, but I'm still facing difficulty. Please let me use that spot, and I request Chair Velázquez and City Council members. I request that to the City Council members and Velázquez, Chairperson. And 1264 and 1253 to pass that bill. I hope I get support in doing it. And I hope that you all sign this bill for me. Thank you, Velázquez and community.
Thank you so much. Does he have a written statement? Okay, so a little different. So let him read his entire statement, and then you follow up with that. Each of you will have 2 minutes.
Wait, I'm sorry, 1 second. 1 second.
Wait, let's wait.
Buenas, yo sé que llevamos muchas horas acá adentro, pero por favor, tratar de no hablar tan duro. Por favor, deje a las otras personas hablar. Cuando es tu turno, también va a ser lo mismo. Gracias.
Bon, maa ngi leen di nuyu yéen ñi ma permettre que ma ñëw fii di wax ak yéen ngeen di ma déglu ci samay jafe-jafe. waaw ñëw naa la ci réew mi octobre l'an 2005 laa ñëw ci réew mi te dama bokk ci famille bu xool lompañ boo xam ne amuñu doole léegi te man rek lañ yaakaar te man awma lenn lu may mën a def lu dul jaay. kon nag maa ngi bindu woon naa ci licence yi maa ngi woon Wyoming, mais sama numéro mi ngi nekk 7642. bon soxla naa ko nag ndax boo nekkee ci mbedd mi jaay amoo licence dañuy jàpp nangu say marchandise ngay sonn te man damay dundal sama famille donc laa bëgg a dundal te nekkuma criminalité te bëgguma def li ko sunu noona léegi ma bëggoon ngeen jàppale ma yéen kilifa yi ba ma am sama licence ci lu gaaw ndax ma mën a liggéey ndax moo gisee police yi damay tiit sax du ma mën a def lenn te léeg-léeg dañuy jàpp nangu sa marchandise te doo xam looy wax léegi nag kon yéen ñu ngi leen di ñaan ndimbal ngeen jàppale nu te sama famille man rek lañ yaakaar am naa juróom-ñetti doom ki ci gën a nekk gone moo ngi nekk 17 ans te maa leen di toppatoo seen affaire njàng seen wér seen santé seen lépp man rek lañ yaakaaruñ keneen te bëgguñu maa dégg ci ma nekk ci yenn jafe-jafe ndax bu nee jàpp nañ jiw dañoo yaakaar ne dafa sàcc ba dafa xeex te loolu du ma ko def amuma kenn benn histoire du ma xeex du ma def lenn damay liggéey di fay samay bil li ma am lu ma yàlla jox nag maa ngi ciy fay ay taxes ci réew mi dugal participer ci réew mi ndax bëgguma liggéey rek lu may am ak su ne ma def ko sa bopp maa ngi ci participer di ci joxe li nga xam ne ay taxes di ci war a génn kon nag léegi ngeen jàppal ma ci sama licence bi ba ma mënu génn ma mën toog jaay fa dundal sama famille di fay samay rent samay location amoo benn ak kenn ndax am na koo xam ne sax bëri fan yee ñëw na sàcc sama marchandise mais man doo nga maa nokk te bëgguma xeex ak moom te bëgguma xeex ñu mu nekk sama tur tout ça te njàpp yi baaxul ci man ndax damay indi ay jafe-jafe léegi nag loolu laay bañ kon nag dégg nga ngeen jàppale ma maa ngi leen di gërëm nag bu baax a baax di leen sant ci déglu bi ngeen ma déglu ma wax ak yéen.
Thank you. Thank you. If he has any additional points that he'd like to submit, he has 72 hours to submit. Thank you.
My name is Ibra Diagne. Firstly, thank you, Chair Velázquez and the committee for giving me the opportunity to testify today. I want to start by saying that I have been a vendor in Lower Manhattan for 15 years. I live in Harlem and work in Lower Manhattan since I first migrated to the United States back in October 2005. I am part of a very low-income family that relies on me to survive. I have a wife and 8 children. My youngest being 17 years old, who is still in school and relies on his dad for his education, food, and stability. My dream is to get my own general vendor license so that I can work without fear. In fact, I have been on the wait list for 6 years to get my own license. My number is 7642 on the waiting list. There are over 7,000 fellow New Yorkers before me who have the same dream. And even though I'm trying to do everything right, to get my own license and run my own business, I have been arrested many times just for being a vendor. I want to be clear, even though we are often stereotyped, I have not once sold any illicit or counterfeit merchandise. I have been arrested for not having the very license I'm on the waiting list to get. Each time my merchandise is confiscated, I lose money, and it makes it harder to support my family. Why did I choose to become a vendor? Because I'm old. I'm not strong enough to do many jobs. So when the choice is vending or being homeless, I choose to work. I pay my taxes. I contribute to the United States economy. I'm hoping that the Intro 1264 will eliminate criminal penalties for food and general vendors passes because we vendors are worried about how it would impact our immigration status. I'm currently looking for an immigration attorney, and I'm concerned that when I want to change my status, this will come back to bother me. I fervently hope that this bill is passed so that arrests can end and people will not be detained any longer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And once again, please, please submit the written testimony within 72 hours. So right now we're going to call on a break because I think we all need a good stretching. So we will be back. We're going to do a 10-minute break for everybody. 10-minute break, so if you need to use the restroom, get some snackety snacks, we'll be back. Thank you.
I have a question. Can you leave now or?
একবারে চিনেন লাভি নতুন জয়েন দিচ্ছে ওই যে কিষান জ্যাকসনের আছে না কিষান কি জানি জ্যাকসনের যে কাউন্সিল মেম্বার
ও আচ্ছা না আমি
ঠিক আছে